Yeah, we're live. Hi, guys.
Interest rates are on the rise. Gary is the... All right, welcome everyone to Tough Talks. This is the subcategory of the Tough Love podcast. My guest tonight is author Gary Wayne. Gary is the author of the book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, which you can find on Amazon. You can also check him out on his webpage, thegenesis6conspiracy.com, where he has a very, very generous excerpt of his book up on there for your reading pleasure. It is chock full of incredible information.
Hi, Dan. Hi,
concerning
Tricky.
the Genesis
Good to
6
see you
event,
guys.
the Nephilim, or the Nephilim being spawned from the sons of God and the daughters of men. You can find his book here on Amazon. It is $9.99 in Kindle, and it is also $26.99 in paperback. Gary, great to have you back on the stream, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and looking forward to the conversation. And hopefully we'll connect a few more dots for people, and maybe shade in a little bit of context and help people dig. Well, maybe encourage them to dig deeper into things, because and I'm not here to knock churches. I don't like dividing Christians.
Oh, I did
I think
too.
we all know that our current Christian churches, and I think it's about 99% of them, they don't teach prehistory and they don't teach prophecy. So they don't teach the Bible in the full context. So there's always these dangling questions and nagging things that people have. And I tend to be a contrarian that way. So I kind of like to talk about the things that the standard status quo establishment doesn't want to talk about, but show people that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's a little eye-opening, surprising at times, to say the least, but it provides context. Everything starts to make sense with what the Bible is saying if you just let it.
Absolutely. So we talked about it a little bit last time, but you were working on your follow-up book to the Genesis 6 Conspiracy.
Oh, good. What's going on there?
When can we be expecting that to hit the shelves?
Well, that's been a bit of a couple of speed bumps on it. The book is ready. And I had sort of done an initial deal with my original publisher. And what happened was his last son, who was in the business, had left, and the owner is, about 80 years old. And so when he left, the deal sort of went kind of not up in smoke, but everything sort of in question in terms of, what to do next. And so the owner, who is still the owner, said, well, why don't you let me, because I want to wind the business down. I'll represent you and take it to some other publishers. So publishers in the Christian so-called genre of publishers, and he's well connected in there. They basically said, we have nothing against the writing. We don't believe in Genesis 6. We don't believe in talking about prehistory or whatever. And they basically are saying, we don't care whether it's a good seller. We don't care whether it educates. And they declined all of it. And he was shocked. He's like, Christians should be aware of different points of view, but there's censorship that goes on in everything. So yeah. I expected that right out of the gate, but I thought, with a platform, with the previous book, with a larger publisher. So what he has done now is decided that, well, you know what, I'll wind the business down so I can manage it. And all I'm going to do is publish and produce for people I already know, the message that I want to have, get out there for Christians. And so he's going to step back in and publish the book and distribute it, and we'll do the editing and the marketing and everything together. So we're going to stay where we are. And then we'll do for arrangement for, because of his age, maybe down the road, how do we shift that over to another.
Okay, he's only 2 months old, guys.
Company that I'll be talking to in a few weeks. So that's where we are in the book. So I think now that we go through the official startup, because this has been almost 3 months in that whole scenario where I presented the sample chapters, got the details sort of worked. So now we have to go through the editing process and the marketing process, and that's going to take 2 to 3 months before. So I'm expecting probably a fall publishing date. They're going to put it right at the top of the priority list, even though they're always booked out at least a quarter in advance of books that they publish. So yeah, so we're at that point. We're starting back to where I was 3 months ago. So,
man, well, we'll be praying for you. I know I will for sure.
Yeah. But it's just one of those things. It's this message is it needs to get out.
G'day, Bas. Good to see you, mate.
I think there's just so many people who are looking for this information, but there's a strong worldly influence status quo that's out there, and it doesn't matter what organization that you're talking about, Christian or otherwise, that is dedicated to their own agenda, not the scriptural agenda. So, but that's fine. We'll get it out. So I'm excited to get that back moving. And so,
geez, Bas, I'm surprised that link's still up about spirit cooking.
Will be marketed from the same website, and I'll get the generous excerpt up of all 84 chapters. And it's shorter than the first one.
Only by a very tiny bit.
Yeah. Well, there's 98 chapters in the first one, so let's say about 12 to 15%. So a little less.
That's a big old chunky book right there.
Well, and the thing is, I still didn't get all the information in there that's actually in the Bible. There's just so much that sort of talks into this. So I just would like to also throw out there, if I could, if there's anybody in the Orlando area of Florida, I am there not this weekend, but the following weekend for the Real Report conference, and we're going to do live shows, and they're selling tickets. So if you're interested, look up the Reveal Report, and they've got the links to the show. They're selling tickets for the live audiences and things like that. I'll have a table set up. I'll be there when I'm not working on the shows to answer questions and just to meet people. And then in Atlanta, I'll be down there for the Sacred Word Mysteries of Revelation conference. I'll be speaking 2 days. And that is May 25 and 26, I believe it is, but it's that weekend. So the Saturday and the Sunday are the speaking dates I speak on.
Yeah,
both Saturday for an hour and then on Sunday for an hour as well. So I'm going to cover off in the first presentation some of the terminology in Revelation. So I'm going to get things on there, like what wormwood is and what the scorpion beings are, and kind of things like that just will help people, the difference between tribulation and wrath as it's used in Revelation. And then I'm going to go into Revelation chronology. How do you put it in order, and how do you make sense of that order? And I'll explain that through taking it back to, what I think is one of the most controversial things that seemingly is out there these days. And eschatology is put everything around what Jesus said and not vice versa.
Yeah, put Christ right in the middle of it.
Yeah, but that seems to be controversial. Everybody wants to reimagine what Jesus said and define what he said by what the other prophets said, or what they would like to have for it to mean. So I'll try and sort of get that on the table. But the key there is not to get people lost, but just here's a template and here's how it works.
Wonderful. Well, hey, got to figure that the opposition facing you in getting that second book out must mean that you are really barbing the enemy well. So as a good book says, count it all as joy when you are reviled and slandered, for great is your reward in heaven.
Yeah, there's and because of my approach on eschatology, there's also a significant amount of organizations out there that work with Christian conferences and end time prophecy. They will not have me speak. I think I spoke at one and they were just absolutely aghast, even though people are coming up and saying, awesome, for the first time it starts to make sense.
Yeah, goodness.
Okay.
Well, that's a great segue into what we're going to cover today, because it is also a bit of a contentious issue. Tonight we're going to be talking about the book of Enoch. We're going to be getting into the Watchers. We're going to be getting into the end of the world. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Mount Hermon. Yes.
Well, Diane, talk about judgment. Wow. Don't know what happened here. Hang on.
It's the cup which keeps us coming back the Bledisloe side.
Yes, the same Mount Hermon from the Bible. So to kick things off, I recently just finished reading through the book of Enoch, and I'm sure you're well aware of the late Michael Heiser and the work that he's done in studying that as a text man, much like yourself. And some of the questions that I've got here, I've sort of been pulling from other people that I have seen ask very similar questions with regards to this book. And the first one, I wanted to get your take on what's been your experience researching Enoch and its relation to the biblical narrative as a whole.
You know, I like the book of Enoch a lot, the first book, as opposed to second Enoch, sometimes called.
It's a shame Poochie wasn't in that factory that got destroyed. How do you say his name? Poochie.
The Secrets of Enoch, or Third Enoch, or the Book of Giants. Book of Giants, we just don't have enough of it. But it seems relatively more consistent to the Bible and to First Enoch than 2 and 3. So, but the Book of Giants also connects into the Manichaean Book of Giants and works like that. So I have some sort of concerns on that. So what I like to do is I like to read things and put it in context with what the Bible says. So I measure everything outside the Bible from what it says within the Bible, and where it runs directionally consistent, I think it, can give us some extra context. Where it runs in conflict, or there's nothing I can sort of use in the Bible to substantiate what that outside source is saying. I find, I'll note it as interesting, but if I can't match it up biblically, then I won't sort of use it for my positioning and for my explanations. So I have a fairly strong standard that sort of way, and I think that's is very, very helpful, especially when you're getting into other religions and stuff like that. But the book of Enoch is a very interesting book. So we don't have a full Hebrew manuscript, which is one of the big issues.
Oh, what's going on? The Wi-Fi's dropped out. Been doing it all morning. Now it's connected again.
We have some fragments, but we don't have all of it. In fact, we have very little of it. So we have surviving versions of Aramaic, we have surviving versions of Greek, and surviving versions of Ge'ez. I prefer the Ge'ez version translated into English. It's a little more complete than the Aramaic version. And we know there's a lot of consistency there. I'd say probably runs about 99% sort of consistent.
Yeah, that's the best way to pronounce it, Di.
With scripture.
Okay.
And it provides extra detail, but not necessarily in a different direction than what the Bible is talking about. But we also have to remember, when it comes to the subjects talked about before the flood in the book of Enoch, the Bible is rather stingy on that.
Yes. I feel like Moses expected people to just understand when he gave that very small synopsis in those first 4 verses of Genesis 6. I figured he was like, oh yeah, you guys know about this topic. I'm not going to explain it too much more. You know what we're talking about.
Well, the flip side of that, though, is there was like 70 scrolls in the Hagiographa of Judah and Israel that isn't part of the canon. Wow. So what I think might have happened down the road is books like the book of Enoch may have been originally part of the Torah, part of the canon and a larger sort of text of Genesis, but either their scrolls were lost due to wars or the originals weren't found, and weren't sort of kept up. But we do know they must have had an original of the Book of Enoch at one time, because we have Hebrew parchments to it that substantiate it. We have terms in the Book of Enoch that line up perfectly with the Bible, like the sons of God, for example, the watchers. And a lot of people don't realize that the term watcher is actually in the Bible, in Daniel 4 times. And it's the Hebrew word "ayir," which is a very important word to understand, as it's used for other applications in the Old Testament, but that's a different rabbit hole. So, and you also have what I find very interesting is you have a specific kind of angel that's described in the Book of Enoch that most people say, what the heck are they talking about? And that's the Ophanim.
Yes. Oh, perfect segue. I was just going to ask you about the Ophanim. Take her away.
Yeah, so we should know who the Ophanim are. But because things aren't taught.
Who's he saying, the old Fanny? Is that what he's saying?
About the Ophanim. Take her away.
Yeah, so we should know who the Ophanim are. But
can anyone understand what he's saying? All famine or all Fallon? What's he saying?
Yes. Oh, perfect segue. I was just going to ask you about the Ophanim. Take her away.
Yeah, so
Old Flaneem. I think they said Old Flaneem.
We should know who the Ophanim are.
Fanium.
But because
I give up. I don't know what he
aren't
said.
Taught in churches on prehistory or even more recent history, still ancient, and or what's going to happen in the end time, you don't get this kind of information. So Ophanim is a group of angels that are part of the Watchers. So in the Book of Enoch, you have the archangels, you have the seraphim, the cherubim, and the Ophanim, and these are all watchers who are awake all.
Ophanium. Okay, it's a class of angels. Didn't know that.
The time, right? They never sleep. They guard, take care of, serve before God. And that's one of the meanings of watchers, is to be awake, to watch. And it's rooted in a Hebrew word with more UWR as it's transliterated into English. And that means to stay awake and not to sleep. So we have the term watcher that connects. And we also have this Ophanim term that's describing a group of angels that are actually in the Bible. But you won't see the word Ophanim as it's translated into English.
Okay.
So in the book of Ezekiel, in chapters 1 and chapters 3 and chapters 10, you have the vision that Ezekiel receives of the chariot of God. And you have these cherubim, and in the book of Psalms, it's the cherubim who pulls this vision of the chariot of God. And then you have, and cherubs have 4 faces, right? And as you get into the details of the chariot part, you get these wheels, the wheels within wheels. So when it's talking about the wheels within wheels, that's as an inanimate object, it goes back to the Hebrew word Gilgal, which means wheel, just as in Gilgal or Raphaim, the wheel of the giants that's at the foot of Mount Hermon. So just to sort of connect into my obsession where the word is used. And you also have these angels that are described within the wheels. And they're cherubim-like, but they're not the same, because one of the 4 faces they have is the face of a cherubim.
Far out.
Yeah. Now, when it's talking about the wheel angels and referring to these beings, that's the Hebrew word ophan. You put on the I am male plural, as in seraphim, cherubim, Nephilim, Rephaim. You arrive at Ophanim. And so these are the wheel angels, and they have all of these eyes, right?
Yes. So I had heard a long time ago I forget what, not documentary, but commentary I was reading on it, describing the wheel and the wheel that Ezekiel was seeing. And some people, I want to say, they got this probably contrived from the History Channel and them talking about ancient aliens, but they were trying to ascribe a certain gyro or a gyroscope to the actual wheel within a wheel. But then you think, all right, well, this thing is covered in eyes. It seems to have an organic component.
Yeah, it's kind of got both that's going on. And understand it, it's an interdimensional thing. Whatever it is, it's partly angelic, it's partly perhaps technology, it may be partly spirit, partly able to take form. We don't know. It's very, very sort of advanced technology. And what's also interesting as you understand who the Ophanim are, is that we get this, a lot of people say we have, when you get into the book of Revelation, you get the throne room again. You have these 4 living beasts. These are the cherubim. Well, problem is the cherubim have 2 wings. The 4 living beasts have 6 wings. And the Ophanim aren't described with any wings. But the seraphim have 6 wings.
Interesting.
And you have 4 faces on the living beast. So do the cherubim and so do the Ophanim. But these seem to be more of a cherubim face. So now you have like a cherubim face with seraphim wings, and it's full of eyes. So now you have the Ophanim eyes in the mix, and it's almost like this is either sort of a mosaic of those watchers put together, or it is just sort of an allegory that they're all there. They're just describing them as one. But I think it's like something changes as we move forward, that either these beasts, these angels are not going to hold the same position as they had before, and they're sort of amalgamated into one now, or it is just more metaphorical, just as a description to describe all the different types of angels. But the archangels aren't mixed in with them. They're like the 7 angels there, like they are separate. So for some reason, there's something going on going forward in the end time and into the millennium and thereafter that changes about that throne room setup, just as the time you see the 24 elders show up, for example.
Sure, the Casting Crowns event. So that makes me wonder a bit about the concept of locality. When you're existing outside the bounds of time and space, when you have, they call it Planck's constant, when you divide an atom to the smallest absolute particle, eventually it becomes a part of everything all at once. It seems like for beings that could be existing on that plane, that could very well be something within their realm of expertise. But what you mentioned on the Ophanim there makes me wonder, have you ever seen the biblically accurate Christmas tree topper?
No.
All right, so you're gonna get a kick on this one. This is the biblically accurate Christmas tree angel topper, and here it comes at you there.
Well, how is that biblically?
Hey, I was never here. Good to see you.
Absolutely beautiful, but it seems to be.
Tree, I can't imagine what that thing with all them eyes, I can't imagine what that looks like. It's just beyond you, isn't it? You just can't think what it would look like.
First Nations.
Yeah, so I'm seeing notes of the Ophanim inside, the rotating wheels there. But like you just said, they were never described with the wings, so it seems like they've got the seraphim mixed in there as well. One of my internet companions sent that to me around Christmas time. So happy holidays in retrospect to them.
Yeah.
So
the topper on the thelemic tree, commonly known as the cedar of Mount Hermon.
Yeah, adds a whole different spin on the notion of Advent. So on the topic of the Watchers themselves, I was looking through, because we have inside the Bible, like you said, we hear of the seraphim described, we hear the cherubim, and then we also have the beasts, and then we have inside Daniel's visions the other beasts, like we have the one with the multiple horns, the one horn that's grievously wounded and is blaspheming God. When I was going through the I believe it was in chapter 17 or 19 of Enoch, when it was describing the different angels and different watchers. It had, of course, the cherubim listed, the seraphim, the Ophanim, and then it said angels of power and angels of principalities.
Yeah.
Would those be within the same ranks, or are those separate?
Separate ranks. So you have a hierarchy to both loyal and rebellious angels, and so principalities and powers, as they're translated into English, the English translation actually confuses them at times. And so you've got Greek words that are like arche, which would be for like principalities. They might be called rulers in other passages, but again, all.
Well, I just seen that link you posted. I wonder how old that was.
Goes back to the word arche. They are lower level, so you have the watchers at the top, and then you have another layer of intermediary angels, and then I think you have messenger, soldier angels on the third level. I put this together in the new book, and it's a little bit different than the standard version of the church, because they're not dealing with the original language, and it gets things up. So you get like powers that will be translated from exousia and dunamis. They're like two different kinds of angels. So I separate those out and match them up. And so you're going to get pillars that are going to go downstream. So you're going to have like the seraphim. They're going to have a hierarchy below them. You've got archangels who have a hierarchy behind them, and you could argue the cherubim have a hierarchy and the Ophanim have one, or they're part of the same one.
Okay.
And I tend to think about them as more as one, but you could think of them as having separate ones. So I put that together, and it's in the new book, and I think it starts to make some sense out of some of the terms that are used in the New Testament. We don't get these lower level terms other than angel that's used in the Old Testament. So like the powers, you don't really get that translation coming out of the Old Testament. So you have to put both of them together to arrive at that hierarchy.
Gotcha. Now, I believe in our last chat, did you say that there's around 10 different classes of angels?
Yeah, I would, let's see, I would say there are.
Hi, Gigabyte. Good to see ya.
I would put them at 9 or 10, depending on how you want to classify one of the groups. So like you get one type of angel that seems to be like the mighty ones, or the dunamis, but it's the Icaros, and that's a specific Greek word for those mighty angels in the book of Revelation, versus where you would have mighty angels that are in the rest of the New Testament.
Okay, gotcha. So then that leads into my next question here. So we have right out the gate, within the first 6 chapters of the book of Enoch, we have this scene that plays out with the angels atop Mount Hermon, spearheaded by Samyaza. Can you go into that there, and what the significance of it being atop Mount Hermon means for the Bible narrative?
Yeah, just for the audience, give a little bit more detail as to what's going on in that scene.
Sure. So for those who are unfamiliar with the book of Enoch, we have this confederacy of angels. We have leaders over thousands and over 10,000s that are atop Mount Hermon, and they're being brought there by Samyaza, who is sort of their overseer. 200 angels contrive to make a pact that they are going to commit this very grievous sin with the daughters of men, and in so doing are ensuring themselves a one-way ticket straight into the abyss.
Sure. And this is significant because it has an effect both before and after the flood. And Mount Hermon is important both before and after the flood. So the 200 angels, we don't get that biblically. Does it really matter whether there is 200, 300 or less? What we do know is biblically the sons of God, which are referenced as angels in the book of Enoch, just as Job 38 recognizes the sons of God as angels, like the morning star orders of angels that are in the Old Testament. So,
Wow.
and other references, you might look at Job 1:6 or 2:1, and you have stars and angels and host of heaven, sons of God, and angels used interchangeably and together in pairs at times throughout the Bible, connecting them all as that type of being. So when we see the sons of God in Genesis 6, this is likely from the watchers that are described in Daniel 4. So everything sort of starts tied together, and you have this oath that is being taken, and it's Haram anathema, as it's understood. It's the accursed oath of Mount Hermon to carry it out to the end, no matter the consequences. So it's an accursed oath, and it comes from the Hebrew word haram, Charam and em. There's several different variations or words that are all sort of interlinked. So we can take the words there and we match them up biblically in the Old Testament. I do that in the new book for people. So sort of look forward to that comparative as well. And this is the oath-based society that they are establishing before the flood.
Scrappy, he loves you. You remember
Okay.
And if giants are recreated as opposed to surviving after the flood, but I guess if they survive, you're just carrying over the oath, or there's another oath that might be sworn on Mount Hermon with the Baalim, as we would understand that biblically, who are the ones accredited in the Ugaritic text for creating the Rephaim. Right?
Okay, so
as part of the second version, they would have sworn a similar oath of Haram anathema, and the oath-based world is the world we swim in today. Just as we're told not to swear oaths because you're going to be held accountable for that.
Yeah, it's takes it right back to Judges with Jephthah's tragic vow, and essentially taking an allowance that he really didn't have to do because God was already going to give him victory.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. I want to touch on one thing and then come right back to this. One of the big questions that's been arising a lot from our last talk together was, okay, well, if the Nephilim were all wiped out in the flood, then how do we have them back on the scene again? And one of the things that I mentioned was that just because they were wiped out or all drowned in the flood, it does not preclude another potential sinning of angels, because we do know that the fall that takes place wasn't the sin that Peter and Jude are describing in them disrobing of their outer bodies to copulate with human females.
Yeah, and I kind of cover this off in my book, that there's different theories as to how they survived the flood. And I lean heavily towards second incursion because it just makes more sense. And that there's really a distinction between the
Triggy, they can make vaccines safe like they did back in the day with the polio vaccine and all that, but you need time to develop it. That's why I didn't trust the COVID one. COVID showed up and 3 months later they had a vaccination for it. It just didn't make sense.
And the Nephilim, and probably in a lot of ways that we talked about in the last show. But I recognize that they could have survived the flood somehow. So there's two other kind of buckets that I sort of put in there. And one of them is somehow on another ark. And this is under the bucket of help from the fallen angels.
Well, and with 600 flood myths over the world, like you figure that, like, are all these people making this up?
Yeah, and a lot of them are giant survival stories. So, like the classic is the Epic of Gilgamesh that people like to beat Christians over their heads with, and saying that's the counterfeit story that shows up in the book of Genesis, because if we have a longer, older standing manuscript or stone version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that dates back to minimum 2150 BC from the stones, but it's more Sumerian. But you know what I tell Christians is don't fall into those traps that the polytheists and the seculars who answer to the polytheists will lay out
Yep.
there. Of course, it's an older surviving manuscript because the Torah doesn't come down to Moses until about 1400 BC, 1400 to 1450. So it has to be older. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
right. So, but within that, you have giant creation after the flood with Gilgamesh, because he is the son of Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and the mother goddess, fertility goddess, queen of heaven, Nin or Nin son, as some of the translations are, just as Enkidu is also the offspring from the same mother goddess. That's a second creation. And so you also have a survival story there with the ark, because not only are Gilgamesh and Enkidu 2/3 god and 1/3 human, and Gilgamesh is described as 11 cubits tall, and as a king of Uruk, he'd be 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide, and 4
Wow.
cubits wide. So this was a
17
giant.
feet
And there's
wide.
just,
Big
No
old boy
way.
right there.
he's not just a little stronger, he's a monster.
Yeah.
Even bigger than King Og would have been based on King Og's bed size. So you have Utnapishtim and all of his family, who are archetypical Nephilim picked by fallen angels, with an ark supplied by fallen angels to survive the flood. And he's 2/3 god and 1/3 human, as is the rest of his family. So you've got both in that version as to how they might show up. Deucalion and Pyrrha was one other example in the Greek mythology that are talked about as the Greek Noah. Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. So he's a giant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another giant survival story. So, but under the bucket of fallen angels helping, they could take them in the earth, probably in another dimension, into Sheol, if they wanted to protect them. They could take them off the earth if they wanted to do that. Somehow, with the help of fallen angels, just as the fallen angels provided the ark for Utnapishtim and Deucalion. So, and you also have another bucket that people like to use, and this is my least favorite of the groups, is the somehow on the ark theory. So you have polytheists that say Ham was a giant. You have polytheists that will say all the sons and Noah were giants and all of the wives were giants. Some will say that either Tubal-Cain, as in the last Noah movie, or Og is doing mysticism. They were a stowaway on the ark. Some people will say in the Christian community that the wives carried the giant DNA.
I've heard that.
And that's how they show up through the Canaanites, but just the Canaanites apparently, which kind of makes, anyways, I'm not real, I don't rule them out because we're not told specifically how, but, and a lot of people might ask me, well, how could they survive the flood if God destroyed all things? Well, you have to look at the detail. If you wanted to make this argument that they survived, you could look at both in Genesis 6 and in Genesis 7, I think it's in 7:4, I think it's 6:7, where God just said he was going to destroy everything he created. He did not create the giants. And so if you wanted to look at a legal term, and that he's still permitting free choice of the fallen angels who aren't going to go to the abyss, you could make a case that there's a survival story, but you're starting to fall in on a little bit of legalism, and I know that connection is there, but for me, if we understand that the sons of God went to women and created the Nephilim that's described in Genesis 6:4, and then again, we can understand that quite easily as again before the flood and again after the flood. And there may have been just different fallen angels that did it. And as some people have stated it, the second one was, well, one was for passion and one was for spite.
Yeah. I was like, we're already doing, might as well just go ahead and light this candle.
Tricky, he'll mesmerize you with his hairdo. Trump's got something weird going on with that hairdo he's got, so he'll sort of put a spell on you with his hair if you go and attack him.
I think it was spite both times, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, and to what you were just saying there, especially inside Genesis 7:20 through 24, Where if we're going to be, textualists and we're going to take the word at its face value, it says that every living thing on the face of the ground was what died. Doesn't say as for anything atop the surface of the water. So I think that's also a very plausible idea, because God knows they're not just going to stand on the.
What about Billy Goat's wife? It's a guy. If you look at Billy Goat's wife, it's completely a guy. And some people say Billy Goat's is really a girl. But I do know the wife's a guy, the one he divorced.
Very tippy top of a mountain if the water's covering 15 feet. I mean, you have to be some tall boys and then wait out almost a full year for that water to abate.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah. So, but either.
Tricky, he uses the same hair barber as Kim Jong-suk from North Korea. They share the same barber.
Right. I mean, what we do know is, and this is very
So does Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn uses the same barber.
difficult for people who are part of the establishment dogma is there are giants before the flood, there are giants after the flood.
Yep.
And you can wish them away. You can change and bend scripture like a pretzel, but you can't take the word away that says there were giants before the flood, there were giants after the flood.
Yep.
Yeah, Vast, Billy Goat's a girl. I agree.
Absolutely. So jumping off that there, we have this confederacy of angels that they have all contrived to commit this sin. I love what Samyaza says there as they're about to swear these oath. And tell me if I've got this right here. So this is after they've already fallen from heaven, and they know that they're going to be damned creatures for the sin of going with Satan and forsaking God and his truth and his grace. So my take on this here and what Samyaza says, it says, and Samyaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear that you may not wish this deed to be done, and that I alone will pay for this great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath and bind one another with curses, so not to alter this plan, but to carry out this plan effectively. My logic behind that there is that they're all looking at each other going, all right, we're already screwed here. However, if we can mess up God's plan in having an actual Messiah be born.
Jay-Z, I grew my hair long because I couldn't get a haircut because I didn't take the vaccination. You couldn't get a haircut for 2 years if you didn't have the vaccination.
From a pure lineage of man and then God's seed himself, then we can totally mess up his entire redemption arc here in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and I would say a little grander than that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the Messiah issue is a secondary plan B type of thing, if you want to look at that, or plan C.
Thank you, Osney.
Put it in on the scheme of things. They're looking to create the demigods to lead people away from God, to have them have no knowledge about God, and to swear allegiance and oaths and worship the pantheon of fallen angels. And that the demigods are there not only to lead humankind away, but to destroy them, not just physically, but also spiritually, so that they will not attain their destiny, that they will turn them into either so evil or destroy them from the faces of the earth. There are no descendants, right? That it's just going to be the offspring of the demigods that are going to be in this world. And so
Jay-Z, we were pretty much the test case on how to lock down the world. They give it a test march on us. So that's why I shut everything down. It was really crazy for about 2 years there.
That's what they're trying to do. And the angels do not want the Messiah to be born to somehow, and they don't know what the answer is to this, but to somehow cause it that humankind will be raised up to be like angels in the future time, and to be probably raised higher by the utter sort of disgust that these angels had for humanity and the crimes that they committed against humanity, and that we will we were to right from the beginning to judge those rebellious angels for the crimes against humanity in the future time. So they wanted to make sure we were wiped from the face of the earth. We were wiped from the the book of life, all the names blotted
Hey,
out,
Talia,
so that
good to
we
see
would be
you.
remembered no more. Sounds very familiar when you start getting into the Israel scenario at the time of the conquest. It's the same plan, to be a inferior, not worthy being, and to justify the angelic rebellion so that they would be able to have their own realm on their own. They knew they couldn't win.
Mhm.
They always knew that. What they didn't know, as Corinthians talked about, is they didn't understand a resurrection. That was
Yes.
hidden from them.
And
Otherwise, as it says, the princes of this world, or the arches of this world, would not have ensured Jesus was crucified.
sure, it's almost as if they looked at each other and said, "All right, well, like after the Messiah was born, and you actually I'll touch on that here in a second too. But after the Messiah is finally born, and then
Oh, Triggy, it's fake news because of that Barbie movie that's out. Pink everywhere on that Barbie movie.
the plot to have him snuffed out at birth is thwarted, because they're off in Egypt land, and then he finally is actually hung on that cross and he dies for his sin. It really seems to me that, like you were saying, with the more grand over the top scheme, is they're going, all right, well, we failed in stopping the Messiah to be born. We failed in stopping him from dying for the sins of all mankind. Let's hit God where it hurts, and let's see how many of his children we can cause to get corrupt and fall away as we can, and see how many we can take with us.
And I think that because nothing is new under the sun, that within that Nephilim culture before the flood, there was an Antichrist type figure that we don't know a name to.
Thank you, I was never
Just
here.
as there will be an Antichrist figure in the end time, and just as all the leaders of the beast kings are trying to become an Antichrist figure, except that Michael prevents that from happening. He doesn't prevent the beast empires from rising. He prevents Antichrist from taking power until the ordained time. And so, I think that we need to understand the days of Noah so we can better understand what that end time is going to be like from that sort of perspective. And we also get an incident in the book of Giants of Enoch, where there's these dreams that they're going to go to, that the giants are having, and they go to Enoch to say, is there anything that we can do to prevent this catastrophe from coming? And Gilgamesh in the book of Giants. So the Gilgamesh after the flood then would be named after the giant before the flood, which is not unusual, just as Hercules would have had a counterpart before the flood.
Sure.
Because Zeus is an offspring god after the flood who creates Hercules by marrying alchemy, Aclyme, I think is the spelling of it, alchemy. I'm butchering it a little bit, but I'm close.
You're doing better than that one.
A bit of a dark spot on that, but anyways, he's a post-diluvian giant. So Gilgamesh in the book of Giants, he's so upset that he is going to try and storm heaven. He's like an Antichrist type figure, and he's going to make war with the sons of God. He's going to make war with the angels, and that's Antichrist-like pedigree, if you want to put it that way, because in Daniel 10, Antichrist will storm heaven, which is, I think, happens at the same time as the war in Revelation 12 at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And they're going to try and take over heaven, just as Satan tried to do in Isaiah 14, and do it again in the end time. But Antichrist actually pulls down some of the starry host in Daniel 10 and tramples on them.
Wow. So now, I guess when Daniel's referring to him pulling them down, is he referring to a secondary fall, or is he referring to the Antichrist, like literally besting them?
Well, if you go to Revelation 12, you understand that Michael pushes, and his armies, they push all of the fallen angels down to the earth, right, for the last 3.5 years. But it would seem that Antichrist, who is kind of leading that as the false Messiah to overthrow the dark lord of the universe, as they like to call the God of the Bible, he's able to wrestle some of these angels as prisoners down to the earth and does horrible things to them in the end time, to show how powerful that they actually are, to put up propaganda. We didn't really lose this war.
Yeah.
So they have to come up with some sort of story on that.
It's all so counterfeit. I love how you describe inside Genesis 6 Conspiracy, your book there, about how Satan and his minions are more or less trying to duplicate every single great event that God has done.
Yeah.
If for nothing other than to cause just even more mass falling away. And it's why we even have inside the Bible where it says, were it not for the fact that those days were cut short, not even the elect would have been able to stand up under it.
Yeah, everything would have been destroyed. No flesh would survive if the days weren't cut short. And even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, which is why he is going to save the elect from that time of trial. And that's the time of the mark that marks the ones who will be going under the wrath of God. We'll go through tribulation, but we won't go through the wrath. The wrath happens in the last year of the last 7 years. But we'll be saved that where you have to make that choice, because the deception will be that strong. It will deceive some of the elect. And you have to understand, he's going to do a counterfeit resurrection. He's going to have a counterfeit Armageddon.
My gosh. So
everything attributed to Jesus will be counterfeited.
I recently watched one of the Fall Brothers documentaries, and they were talking about the final great deception. And actually, they referenced you. It looks like you did some work on with them on that documentary.
I actually didn't do any work with them, but I worked with them on podcasts and stuff like that. And
oh,
really
okay.
My stuff. So,
well,
their difficulty is they work for a company that takes a different eschatological position on some things than I do. So,
gotcha. So, well, I mean, and I guess to that end, they mentioned a lot of the same things that we're touching on here, the counterfeit nature of things. So, sort of piggybacking off of that, I noticed one of the chapters inside the Book of Enoch specifically talked about those 7 sacred sciences that you have these 7 angels that are taking upon themselves to start imparting to men. Now, in their doing that, is that to say that there wasn't an understanding of, say, like mathematics, or an understanding of like trigonometry or geometry already on Earth, or was this them sort of taking it and corrupting it?
Yeah, so I would say that Enoch, as what the Gnostics believe, and particularly through the records of ancient Masonry, who take their organization back to Cain and Enoch and Lamech of the Cain line, and Tubal-Cain and Jubal and Nama, as great patriarchs, say that they did have knowledge that was handed down from Adam, from God, because he had to.
Yeah, when the stream's over, I'm going to have to re-edit the title and put Enoch in properly.
Run this massive, almost continent-like, from the Euphrates to the Nile River, where there was all of these orchards, all of these herds of animals, domesticated animals, crops, all sorts of crops. As you take that language back to the Hebrew, you understand this has been sort of whitewashed as to the size of. He would have had to been taught by God all sorts of things, and because it's absolutely massive. And then God actually provided him one helper.
Here you go, kid, figure it out. Just you two.
Yeah, I've doubled your capacity. So that knowledge was passed down to Cain, and Cain passes that knowledge on to Enoch, his son. There's 2 Enochs, if people weren't aware of that. One son of Cain and one son of Jared. And the polytheists, they raise son of Cain, Enoch, to almost godlike status, as he's understood in 3rd Enoch, as in being raised to an angelic type of being because of the.
Diane, they were pushing that here, that Alzheimer's drug. They were pushing that here about 2 or 3 days ago on all the news channels. Wow.
Knowledge. So he puts this knowledge into 7 disciplines that we know as the 7 sacred sciences or the 7 liberal arts today. And then this knowledge is what merges with the angelic technology and knowledge that suddenly takes this whole knowledge base to a level that we haven't reached yet today. But I think what we're seeing is angelic technology once more being provided to get us back up to that level of knowledge, so it can be like the days of Noah, understanding Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. Both had giants, both had fallen angels.
That's sort of right in line with how L.A. Marzulli will talk about these megalithic structures. You know, he's like, this is fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture, 100% through. You know, things that we can't even recreate now. You get stonemasons that look at these structures where you can't even fit a piece of paper between the stones, and they're going, I don't know, man.
Yeah, and they use the 7 sciences not only to lead people away from God, but also to degrade God, as in slander him, and not give God credit for anything, but to honor their pantheon of gods, right? So all of these megaliths, all of these cities, just as all the sciences and education today is swimming in polytheist imagery, whether it's the gods of Greece or whatever, the architecture, it's all polytheist, and it's honoring the pantheon of gods. And so they would honor the gods of the zodiac, and they would have zodiacal, astronomical, and astrological alignments and things encoded into it. It would have sacred geometry. It would have ratios that only could come from the fallen angels or a very advanced society. And it was designed to be done at a level we can't do today.
FDA.
And at a time where they shouldn't have been able to even build huts based on what the secular people would tell us.
Wow. Well, you bring up, the zodiac and the signs of the stars. I mean, and what we understand today as the zodiac is a total corruption of the Jewish Metzeroth, the original zodiac that told the entire story of redemption through like the 3 deacon constellations and then their 3 stars, like in such minute detail.
Yeah, astrology is a corruption of astronomy, and it's done to, again, be used to show people that all things are controlled by the pantheon of gods. And in that is the worship and the ritual thereof.
Wow. So here's another question then for you. So I guess on the topic of corruption, and what the angels that fell, the watchers, ended up engaging in, because we have.
I'll tell you what, the host, he's a pretty good interviewer. He's asking some really good questions.
A list of things inside Leviticus 18 where it talks about the people that lived in Canaan doing all these abominations and for which the land vomited them out. One of the acts they engaged in there, in addition to incest with one's relatives, was bestiality. Now, just reading through chapter 17 and 19 of Enoch, it mentions inside there this shape-shifting aspect that the watchers had. And it made me wonder, can the watchers take on both animal form and or could they take on a feminine form?
Great question. Wow.
If they wanted to.
Yes, they could take any form that they wanted.
Wow.
It's that powerful. So you have, when you have the duality of polytheism and the mother goddess, they're counterfeiting the Holy Spirit. And so, right? So, and most people don't, but we get these mother goddesses as the Queen of Heaven or Astarte and other names in the Bible that are referencing these female gods that counterfeit, the Holy Spirit in terms of the polytheist religion. And so they can also take other forms. And so let me just present another example other than the male and sort of the female. This isn't biblical, but it gives you an understanding from how the polytheists understand it. So gods like Zeus were known to take the form of a wolf.
Or a swan.
Right? And AKA the mythology of the werewolves, creations of another type of Nephilim, right? Okay, so if we understand that, and we understand that in First Nations they have all sorts of gods that take animal forms and things like that, right? And so they can take forms any way they want. And people say, well, angels are spirit beings; they can't take a physical form, and so therefore they can't have sex, right? And then they link in, Matthew, the book of Matthew, and say there's no sex in heaven, except they leave out the Luke aspect of it, which gives you the whole explanation, because the only way these cases can be made is if you leave out the inconvenient passages. So, sorry to be tongue-in-cheek on that, but we do get examples of angels in the Bible taking human form. So when the pre-existent Jesus decides to go visit Abraham, for example, he is going to take a human form, and he is going to eat and drink and touch and interact physically. He creates what you call an oikotarian. And an oikotarian is a word that comes up in Jude 1:6 out of Greek for the habitation that those fallen angels left in heaven. So you have an oikotarian that's required for heaven, an oikotarian that's required for the physical world. So in 2 Corinthians 5:2, you get into a word that says the house of heaven, because it's talking about this sort of concept, and that's a dwelling place in heaven, a house in heaven. So,
hey, Johnny, good to see you,
dwelling
mate.
place for the spirit. So the implication is you need a dwelling place for the spirit. And a dwelling place for the spirit is the soul and the body in the physical world. And the spirit needs that, and it merges with the soul, and it creates that oikotarian. So, Jesus being, or the word before he became flesh, is all powerful, right? Alpha, Omega, as the word of God. And so it can create that. But angels don't have the same power as the word of God, but he's accompanied by 2 angels. And these angels aren't understood as angels at first. They look like men.
Yes.
They don't look like, they don't have wings. They don't have this spiritual opalescent type of presence. They are physical bodies. Now, some people say, well, angel, it goes back to the Hebrew word malek, and it can mean a messenger. Well, Hebrew words have several different meanings. You have to apply the right meaning for the application.
Yeah, it's like the 20 words used for the word tree. It's like, well, this is a tree in bud, a tree in fruit, it's a tree that's dying, a tree in the winter, a tree in the fall.
Yeah, so yes, angels are messengers. That's part of their description as well. And sometimes that word messenger and malak is used for humans, but clearly it's an ambassador sending a messenger in that narrative. So again, don't misapply. It's got to fit within the sentence, the narrative. And in this narrative, they come with God. So angels typically aren't named. Humans would be named. These are not named. Again, then these are the ones that go on to Sodom.
Yes. The ones that take Lot by the hand and have to escort him out of the city.
Yes, that the people of Lot want to have sex with.
Oh my gosh.
Right? But is that they want to have sex with males with males, or do they want to have those angels have sex with their daughters? It's not clear in the narrative. It's just assumed, and it could be a bit, but there's an assumption it's male upon male. Or they clearly also understood perhaps that they could change their form into female if they wanted to, and that they could have sex to make other giants. Sodom,
okay. So I gotta stop you there.
Sodom is a epicenter of giants, and is likely, and I have a document on this for people for second incursion, is likely the location for the creation of post-Diluvian giants, as opposed to Gomorrah, which the Gnostics say was the location for antediluvian, and they also agree with Sodom as being the location for the second incursion. And so they were totally familiar with this doctrine, and they were looking to add more giants in there because the post-Diluvian giants have a fertility issue.
So then, could that there be how we end up with? At least I think it could be. But could that be how we then end up with Nephilim spawning from Ham's line specifically from Canaan, because like you mentioned, them being able to take on a
I
feminine
didn't hear
form.
Talia.
First, we had the Watchers came down in male form with the daughters of men. I suppose the reverse could be done, because we have from Canaan's line, we have like 5 major Nephilim tribes right out the gate, specifically spoken of inside Numbers 13, when the spies return and give their report of the land.
Yeah.
You think that that's a possibility there? Because it seems like it to me.
Well, I would say 2 different things happen. You have if you understand the Rephaim in their other associated tribes are aboriginals to the land. They are in, let's say, the land of the covenant before the dispersion at Babel. So sometime after coming down the mountain of the Noahites, fallen angels like the Baalim of Mount Hermon, who are the ruling council of the gods, in Psalms 82 over the 70 nations, Deuteronomy 32, both before and after the flood, some of those angels would have taken forms of females and males, and they would have had probably, I think though, the original probably would have been males taking daughters of Canaan, and producing giants. And then you would have had those Rephaim, or those giants, then taking daughters of Heth and Canaan and Sidon, and they're going to create the 9 patriarchless giants. So you have 2 different episodes where you create the giants and the hybrid giants, and the patriarchless nations like the Amorites, who are likely descended through a Rephaim of the Anakim, because the Amorites are blonde hair and blue eyes.
No, Shawnee, that wasn't me making strange noises. I didn't hear it. So
as what the Anakim are described as.
I could have been a vacuum cleaner. Someone was vacuuming the hallway.
Or shown as in history and on reliefs.
Hey, Barry,
you
good to
have
see
these
ya.
hybrids that would be working as this greater, taller than human, 6 to 9 feet tall, as the Egyptians described them as the Shazoo, versus the taller giants that would be 10 to 14
not
feet
guilty,
tall.
Shawnee.
Maybe
Not
sure.
guilty.
Gary, did you know that Alice and Jane from work saved themselves thousands switching?
Wow. And so going up to sizes, it actually reminds me, reading just in like the first 2 chapters of Enoch, where it talks about the first children born to the Watchers. It describes them in one accounting. I see it describe them as being 3,000 cubits tall. Another one describes them as being 3,000 ells tall, and there's a pretty significant difference in size there.
Well, we don't know what. Yeah, so the Aramaic version says cubit, and the Giaz version, which is the more complete version, says L. And so cubit is not a dimension that was used before the flood. L would be. That would be a carryover, but nowhere do we get scripturally how big an L is. And it says 300 L's or 300 cubits. If it's 300 cubits, it's somewhere between 450 to 600 feet tall. That's just yeah. So I'm thinking an L is a lot smaller type of dimension. That's an ancient term that
not all.
Antediluvian giants are thought more likely to be between 20 and about 40 feet tall. And then the post-diluvian giants are going to be smaller. So Gilgamesh would be sort of the outer range that we get for sizing of 19 feet tall. So all throughout polytheist accountings, you see somewhere between, kind of like 9 to 14, 15, 16 feet tall for post-diluvian giants. Goliath was six cubits and a span, and the king of Gath, that Ashish succeeds Gath as king afterwards. And Josephus said that you should measure the giants on a royal cubit as opposed to a standard cubit. And just as Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, Goliath was the king of Gath, and the other 4 stones reserved for that day were for 4 other kings of the giants of the Philistine
Get all them brothers.
if you had to use them that day. So he's 6 cubits in a span. So if you use an 18-inch cubit versus the 21, you're at 9 feet 9 inches. And if you're using the royal cubit, which I think should be applied and certainly was understood at that time, at the time of Josephus, that would be the dimension that you would use. It'd be 11 feet 3 inches. Now, the bed of Og was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. So he was the king of Ashtaroth and Edrei, and the last of the Rephaim. Giant, as it says, he is the last of the giants. That's the Hebrew word Raphaim, a post-diluvian giant. So that bed, using a royal cubit of 21 inches, would be about 16 feet long.
Wow.
So if it's that size or a little bit smaller, it doesn't make that big a difference, but he's going to be somewhere between 12 to 13 feet tall to 14 to 15 feet tall, depending on royal or standard cubit, and I would lean to the higher one. And the bed was 4 cubits wide. So again, it would be
Shawnee, in what way are they coming down on Oprah Winfrey?
6 to 7 feet wide. Now, so he's not as tall as Gilgamesh, and he's not quite as wide, but you get this 2 to 1 height to width ratio, which was a standard sizing for the giants versus the 3 to 1 of humans, because they're called stout in the King James Version Bible. And stout is also part of a definition for words like zaz and as, meaning strong and things like that. Stout as in muscle, as in wide. Right? And that bed was to be assigned to all of the Israelites going forward, and it was on display at Ramah after the defeat of King Og to show people how big the giants were, that they never forgot. It wasn't used for ritualistic things, although it could have been, but he would have had a bigger bed for his rituals, because he would have had many wives, right, as they did those fertility rituals. So this was his sleeping bed, not his ritual bed. And so he would have been 5 or 6 feet wide.
My gosh. Wow. Like, no wonder David's going for the headshot when he's slinging that stone. Like, it's just going to bounce off any other spot.
And he took his head with his sword.
Yes, he did.
Because it's important to understand this. This is you just don't do it for show, right?
Yes.
David's not there he's a humble servant of God, and he's not there to sort of engage his ego, but he wants to show the head to all of Israel, because they're afraid that Goliath is going to get up
and come a calling.
Kill David, but come kill them as well, right?
Yeah.
And there's a deep-seated understanding there that is communicated in the story, that the Rephaim and the Nephilim, and the Rephaim probably to a lesser degree than the Nephilim, as opposed to living giants, had the ability to repair themselves. So you had to strike them in a way and with a sudden blow that they had no ability to repair them.
And that's why, remember the show the other day said they use copper bullets on the fallen angels, the Nephilim, in the underground bases. So they use copper bullets.
So you cut everything off from the brain and the heart, and that would do it. And there's several examples in the Bible of this being done, and I cover that in the new book. But the understanding comes from, just as the terrible ones are described as strong, and stout, the terrible ones are the ones of the giant kings, or the Rephaim kings, or like they're depicted in Ezekiel 32, speaking to Pharaoh in this dual prophecy from the sides of the abyss prison. To another descendant of them, who is representative of the Egyptian beast king or beast empire. This is a later version, but still a representative as such in that dual prophecy. And they are ones that did terrible things while on earth, and when they were killed, they went directly to the sides of the abyss. And there's other accounts of these terrible ones as well. But where I'm going with this is that they're described in terms that were stout and wide and strong, but they have fertility issue as you define the terrible ones. I'll go down one more rabbit hole over this. So that's the Hebrew word. That's the Hebrew word arit. So they'd be the eritim for the terrible ones. As you take that and put the im plural, which means ones as in plural. So you have, I mentioned the Ugaritic text of the Baalim and the Rephaim and the creation, and they're trying to have them come back to create more Rephaim, similar to what's going on at Sodom and Gomorrah, I think. One possible answer to what's going on is that filthy conversation, as the New Testament calls it. And if you look at the second word of Ugarit, it's arit.
What's that mean?
So that's a city of terrible ones, but it's more than that. So the first word is Ug. So if you look at Og, and you take that back to Hebrew, it's OWG. Its source word is Ug, which is UWG. And this is, would be, you would look at it as, you would put it together in Hebrew as Kiriath Ug Eritim. And it would mean city of the Ug, the terrible one.
Wow.
And what's also sort of interesting about that sort of understanding is that Og is this renowned, terrible, fearsome sort of king, and Kiriath is also used for the title of the patriarch, the name of the patriarch of the Anakim, Kiriath Arba, as it's called in the book of Joshua, which is the former name of Hebron. So that's where I add in the Kiriath. And again, you get so much meaning out of the Hebrew, and it starts to make sense. And that Hebrew is based on Old Semitic, which is the root language, which is language that's used in the Ugaritic text. So you get words that match up.
Triggy, I'm pretty sure if I played that link, I'd get a community standard strike. I'm not game enough to play that link. I wish I were, but yeah, I think if I played that, I'd get a community standard strike.
Like, Herman and Haram for the accursed oath and things like that, you just can't imagine how much information that you can use in context with what the Bible is saying that matches up perfectly with the Bible, with the Baalim Council on Mount Hermon.
Wow. Okay. So
I know I went down a rabbit hole.
No. It's perfect because I was gonna bring up Mount Hermon. Real quick though, I have somebody Common Core Reversal asked how big is a cubit? Now the original standard isn't that about 18 and a half inches, and then the Royal's around 21-ish.
Yeah, 18 inches for a standard cubit. A Royal, depending on the country, can go from 20 and a half to 21 inches. And so there's a little bit of discretion on that, but Josephus used 21 inches.
Yeah, I know that's the Royal cubit in Egypt was 21.
Yep.
So Hermon, perfect segue there. All those little rabbit holes, they line up beautifully. So we see the washers in chapter 6. They're atop Mount Hermon and they're making this oath.
Yep.
And that's pretty much the end of it for Mount Hermon. Yep. But then when we get into the Gospels, we see the J-Man take his disciples on up that same mountain there in an event that Matthew, Mark describe as the Transfiguration. And he goes up that mountain, and that's where we see him. His clothes become white as light. He essentially shows them his real godly persona. Now, wow. I love the way Michael Heiser put this during that event there. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. In his writings on the unseen realms, Michael talks about Jesus Christ when he walks up Mount Hermon there, and he does that, and they have the interaction with Elijah and Moses. That was Jesus more or less saying, "All right, y'all, all you fallen angels, all you ne'er do wells out here, I'm coming for you. I'm on your turf right now, and I'm laying claim to this whole place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he underscores that as well before that when it's probably in similar sort of timing, but it's done at a separate time where he takes the disciples right up to Bashan. So there's no question which mountain he's at when he's going to Caesar Philippi. It's in Bashan at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he is declaring at that time, at the bottom of Mount Hermon, he doesn't go to the top, where you have the Pan Temple and where you have the gateways to Hades, that upon my rock,
I'll
Peter,
build this church.
I will build my church, and your time is over. And at this point in time, they don't even know about the resurrection yet. So they're probably wondering what the heck is going on here, but they're saying we're going to kill him anyway.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So they don't learn about it until he tells the most impassioned ones that are in the abyss while he's in the grave what's actually going to transpire. And and I agree with Heiser that this is a foreshadow to where the showdown is going to be at Armageddon. So Megiddo doesn't have a mountain.
Yeah.
Armageddon, Har is the Hebrew word for mountain, and it's a special mountain. It's the mountain of gathering. So Jehoshaphat is a allegory for the valley below Mount Hermon, as the book of Joel talks about. But this specific mountain is the mountain of sacred festivals. As you would take the meaning back to Hebrew, it's a mount of the assembly, the mount of the gathering. This is the Hebrew word moed, as we have it in more of a modern sort of Hebrew form. And so people don't sort of connect that to Armageddon because different sort of spelling. But in Moed, you have this sort of this ayin apostrophe. And in the time of the Tiberian transition of Hebrew, you had Old Hebrew going into this new Tiberian, and they take the ayin letter that would have a sort of sound as opposed to the hard G sound, like the Gimel sound that they use for transliteration into Greek for the New Testament for Armageddon. You have that go silent. And so an example of what I'm talking about is if you look at the city of Gomorrah, okay, they've applied the Gimel G there, for G isn't the hard sound. But the Hebrew word is Amorah with the ayin. It is, so you get both mixes in the Hebrew that comes through. And so if you were to put that G back in as it would be understood in older Hebrew, and understand that this was happening in this transition in the time of John, so it wasn't complete, and the people outside the standard Judaic church were still using the older languages, and to understand it in Old Hebrew, it would be, Har Magid.
Wow.
Right? And this is the mountain of assembly, which is Mount Hermon. And that's where the gathering of the armies is going to be at the end time, because Antichrist, when he sees something from the north and the east, as Isaiah 49 talks about, he sees Jesus coming from the north and the east. And so he starts to move from where he is because he's having a war with the king of the south somewhere in Africa somewhere. He's going to come back up north and up the seacoast, and then set his tents up at Armageddon, which is Mount Hermon, which is the most holiest place of the polytheists on earth. It is where the assembly of the gods are. That's talked about in Psalm 82, and where Satan has his seat above that council. So this is it's all sort of, if you just let the Bible flow in the context of what they're talking about, everything sort of falls into place and makes sense. So Again, I go through this, and there's a lot of detail as I go through this in the new book for the people. So
That's
another flavor of what's coming. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those who love to see sort of a visual of the battles as they're going to be lined out, where the troops are coming from and where they're going, I'd encourage you to get Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. He's got some outstanding visual aids inside there and breaks down the entire thing, goes through the language and how we arrive with key players like Russia and China being involved in that whole affair.
Yep.
So.
And another thing to keep in mind about
Tricky, I think so. I think it's all been exposed by the Lord, 100%.
Mount Hermon is that it has several different names in the Bible. And one of them they're going to use as a counterfeit. And we're given that name. So, I mean, different peoples have different transliterations for Mount Hermon. And so in Deuteronomy 4, right at the end of the chapter, I think it might be 45, 43, 45, it's called Mount Sion, S-I-O-N. And it's a different word than Zion. So
always a counterfeit.
Yeah, so this is going to be the Mount Zion of, or Sion, just as that's been translated as Sion in the New Testament in the King James Version, where it should be Zion.
It's followed everywhere.
It's going to be used by the polytheists, and part of that counterfeiting and credibility of Antichrist.
You'll never get rid of him now.
So you also have this coded into the secret societies with the Priory of Sion, which was the parent organization to the Knights Templar that formed the Knights Templar. And
interesting. I would love to get into secret societies and some of the mysticism and the Enochian mysticism as well. And another talk. I feel like we could riff on that for hours.
Yep.
Wow. Lots of great information. If you guys haven't by now, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, please. I also have Gary's social media links inside of our description as well. So here's another one for you here. Bashan is a key player, especially when it comes to discussing Og, king of Bashan, and him being, as the Bible quotes, like the last king of the giants during the conquest of Canaan. We have this really magnificent scene in Psalms 22, where even though it's David rendering the psalm, it seems to be the words of Jesus Christ as he's up on the cross. He talks about his bones being all out of joint, but not broken.
Talia, specific punishments for hurting the children in the Bible. You get a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the lake of fire.
That his body specifically, his bones were not broken, they were out of joint. But he says something really interesting there, and he says, "Behold, I am encompassed on all sides by the bulls of Bashan."
Yeah.
What is he referencing there when he makes that distinction?
Mm-hmm. Well, Bashan is part of Mount Hermon.
Okay, so
Mount Hermon is the location to the assembly of all polytheism on Earth. So the bulls can be understood in a couple of ways. I mean, you have the cherubim who have 4 faces. One of them is either, you can look at that as an ox or a bull.
So he's more or less talking directly to the watchers at that point. Like I would imagine at that scene, they're probably surrounding Golgotha there, watching, thinking, "Hey, we did it, boys, we won."
And the demigods that were created, they're also kind of called bulls because they're strong as bulls and they're thick, and they are the fatlings of Bashan as part of the allegories are slaughtered in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and you get similar imagery at the Mount at the Armageddon battle as well. And that imagery there is again to link you back to these bloodlines, back to these gods, back to their mountain that we have to be aware of, even though our churches don't teach it. And in Isaiah 25, you have another counting of these terrible ones that in the end time are going to be destroyed on a mountain.
Huh. Wow, more credence to the big send off there being atop Mount Hermon.
Yeah, now there's also a passage in the Psalms in 21, right before 22 that you're talking about, where he's dealing with all of these spiritual beings that are taunting him and doing all sorts of things, and who knows what they're capable of doing at that time, but they're certainly not making it any more pleasant for Jesus while he's on the cross. Not that that could be pleasant to begin with, but in Psalms 21, it's talking about the time of the end time. In verses 9 through 11 is very, very enlightening, that, and you'll never hear this verse sort of talked about in church. You just won't. These things have to be not talked about, because, or they have to make up things that they get very uncomfortable with. So, and I'm just going to read it because it's just this powerful to understand why we have to understand things about the giants and how it's connected to the end time and our Resonatra. So it says, "Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger, and the Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath, and the fire shall devour them." So it's clearly an end time wrath, anger prophecy. Verse 10 gets really interesting here. "Their fruit thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from amongst the children of men." This is talking about a different set of beings than humankind. And it says in verse 11, "For they intended evil against thee, and they met."
Yeah, Shawnee, it's easy to judge the Muslims because they're always so wrong. So I get in the debates on Facebook, Muslims versus Christians, hot debates. I join them sort of sites and have a lot of fun judging them.
Mischievous device which they are not able to perform. So this is and they're called the specific branch of the terrible ones in Isaiah 25 that will be destroyed in the end time on the mountain.
Wild. Okay, so to that end, this is something that, and I guess to dig back in onto Enoch again here, we have this scene, which is like, for those who haven't read the book of Enoch, it's broken up into several sections. The first one, you have this accounting of the Watchers, and I believe that goes, it's like chapter 1 through, is it chapter 36? I think it is.
So
and then,
right, yep.
Yeah, and then after that you have Enoch's parables, and then you have this a sort of a lesson in astrology, in astronomy, if you will, where it talks about the seasons of the sun and the moon, and then we have this letter to Noah, and then we have sort of this retelling of a number of very key happenings within the Bible. Actually, inside there, when it's describing lambs being led by a specific lamb being hunted by wolves or hunted by others, it actually lays out for us the story of Moses and them crossing the Red Sea. But inside there, we have this moment where it's talking about the angels that sinned, the Watchers, being cast into the abyss by their fellow angels. This is in Enoch 54. And it talks about those iron chains of immeasurable weight, the ones that cannot be broken. But it went on to describe even more that furnace that you were just referring to, them being cast into a blazing inferno, as it were.
Yeah.
So, like, bearing what they did in mind for their sins, essentially teaching man how to sin so heinously against God, and in trying to pollute our gene pool. One of the speculations that myself, and I just come to find out that L.A. Marzulli actually holds the same idea in mind and belief about what the actual mark of the beast is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this here. For a while, I've been saying that the mark of the beast, while it will allow you to essentially have a stake in society at large, if you will, you can buy, you can sell, you can trade, do all those things, participate in society, but we're told inside the good book that the Rephaim, when they die, their souls are cursed to wander. The Bible describes them as the Greek word shades, and we know that they're essentially like the Walking Dead, zombies, if you will.
Okay, talking about the mark of the beast, Billy Goat Gates done a lecture in 1987 where he spoke about developing a vaccine that shuts down the side of your brain that lights up when you think about spiritual matters. Apparently, there's a part of your brain that lights up when you think about God or spiritual matters, and apparently the vaccine's developed shuts that side down. If that's true, that's why you can't get back to God, because they shut down the spiritual side of your brain, and that's why it can't be forgiven. I think that's more likely going to be the mark.
But their spirits.
Yeah, in Hebrew, it's shade or Rapha.
Okay, yeah.
It's both in Hebrew. And
So,
then daemon in Greek.
Okay, perfect. So then my thought from that is, the reason why they're made ineligible for resurrection is that they're not human. They're not who Christ came to die for.
They're saying their spirit's not directly from heaven. It's a counterfeit spirit.
Yeah. So the contention that I make is, I do believe that the mark of the beast is going to alter a person's DNA, is going to alter their genetic makeup, and is more than likely going to alter them so far in the spectrum towards Nephilim that they're no longer going to be constituted as human, and therefore they'll be ineligible for resurrection because they won't be who Christ has died for.
Yeah. So I would say it's certainly part of what the mark of the beast is and does. It's a lot bigger than any one thing. Like as you say, it's part of this larger system, right? And it can control through that system, who doesn't take the mark to be killed. I mean, this is a talking image that comes with it that's connected to the mark of the beast. It's a teraphim, a talking idol. It's probably a dwelling place for demons and AI and the combination of all of that. But so it's the mark that marks people for wrath. They choose that. And will it do horrible things and change things at the DNA level? Absolutely. But there's something else that we need to remember, that all of the sins of the world are forgiven.
G'day, Phil. Good to see you, mate.
Jesus' a sacrifice, except for one.
Blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Tricky, we all play around and joke here, but we know when to take it serious. So there's no problem there, mate. We're all on the same page.
Yeah. So it's a little bit more than that, right? Than just the changing of the DNA. Because they're going to burn in the lake of fire forever.
I think that they really believe in the dreams that you have and they want to help you get there.
Tripper Deals 2-for-1 sale is on, with hot new deals added. Visit incredible destinations like South Korea, Hawaii, Morocco, and more. Grab your favorite travel buddy and book now. Visit tripperdeal.com.au.
So then there must be, because the Bible makes it pretty clear that we're not going to be just simply duped into accidentally taking the mark. You're going to be presented a very clear choice, like, hey, this is what this entails. You accept this or you don't. I imagine that it probably comes with any number of what we would term as magical or superpowers, because we know that the angels had a litany at their disposal. But that's really interesting, the way you put it out there.
So imagine this system, and as the Davos crew, who answers to the Committee of 300 and are now working with the B20 and the G20 as of last October, imagine a system that they had envisioned in 2017, that the implant system, and we know the mark is an implant, forehead, hand, depending on what it is, it's some sort of implant, will be something that you probably swear an oath to as part of the harem anathema, and people will carry it out to the end no matter what the consequences are, which starts to answer the questions why, when they know they're marked, and they start to blaspheme God when these wrath judgments start coming on them. You have this implant system that they say will be delivered through the healthcare system because people will demand it. Right? That's the first part. There's more to this. So be a little bit patient with me as I lay this down.
It's all you, Gary. You take it.
So this is going to be able to work at the digital level, at the gene level, at the quantum level, at the bot level. So the technology is still developing. So we're talking about quantum mechanics, we're talking AI, different dimensions, and that this is part of adding the immortality aspect of godhood, which is being offered, and why people will want it to protect themselves for all of the other horrible things that are coming on the earth in terms of diseases and stuff. But they will also want godhood and immortality, and this is going to provide that. So it's going to do things automatically to strengthen them, change their DNA, medicate them, give them protection from the pestilences, all sorts of things through this system that's connected at this source of something that goes into multiple dimensions using the quantum aspect. Now, if we look at what they're looking for at CERN, and they're using AI and quantum computing so that they can get into multiple dimensions, they're looking for two things. One is a specific particle, and there's lots of different names for it, but it's not the real name that they're going to give you. They are looking for kinds of particles. But there's one in particular that I'll come back to. And so they're looking for that particle, and or they want to get into the other dimension, into Sheol, into Hades, to the location of the abyss, to let out their pantheon of God, is one aspect. And secondly is to locate the Atma particle, or the Atman particle, as it's also called. Quantum computing is said to have a requisite to understand the Vedas and the Upanishads to be able to have built the original math of quantum math that built the quantum computers that all of the initial scientists studied. And in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, it talks about this Atman particle. We would understand it through the New Age as divine essence, which is a spirit that controls all the knowledge or the wisdom of the complete multiverse or the metaverses. And this we would understand as Sophia, wisdom, like philosophy, the love of wisdom, the love of Sophia, the mother goddess, right? This is a counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. This particle that they're looking for is invisible. You can measure, for lack of a better term, because it's not visible, but you can measure particles that would be visible if you could see at that level. But an invisible one, you can't measure it. And it is this sort of like ghost-like particle that is invisible and merges with a measurable particle. And it contains all of the knowledge of everything that is, through quantum entanglement, dispersed instantaneously through all particles everywhere in all dimensions, that has all the knowledge. So they're trying to find that particle, tap into that technology, because in their belief system, and just as what was offered in the Garden of Eden, is you need unlimited knowledge as well as immortality. So what Satan was offering Adam and Eve was what they call the tree of wisdom, which unfortunately the book of Enoch calls it, which is a Gnostic corruption of the book, and there are some corruptions in First Enoch. That would be one of it, not the tree of good and evil, right? The knowledge of, they had some knowledge, but they didn't have all the knowledge. Satan said that you'll be like God. You will have all this knowledge, and they already had immortality because they were eating from the tree of life. But as soon as they broke the one rule, they were ostracized from Eden and lost their immortality because they didn't have access to the tree of life. So they're trying to pair this back up, and to come back to what the New Age or the Gnostics or Theosophy calls the estate of Eden, or Eden being reinstated as their sort of doctrine, and where you have immortality and all of that knowledge. But you're counterfeiting this essence into your body in the spirit form that changes you, which is the counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. And
Wow.
That's what pushes it over the edge, I think.
Wow. Wow. Gonna sit with that for a second there. It goes right back to what we were talking about.
Diane, looking at that photo of Bill Gates on that link you just said, he doesn't sit like a man. Look how he's crossing his legs. That's not how a man crosses his legs sitting on a chair.
At sort of the top of the talk with the idea of a locality. Some you have this singularity that becomes one with everything.
Yeah, it's a hive mind.
Wow.
It's the ultimate hive mind. And what was understood by the occult bloodlines is that you had, with these genes that you were provided, that also provided the bloodline that produces the Rh negative blood, gene of Isis, the Elven gene, the fairy gene, the gens Julia, the LB gens, lots of different names for these bloodlines that go back to the Nephilim and to Rephaim and to the fallen angels, is that you have inherited demigod traits, right? And one of them was the advantage to think in a hive mind, so that you could work together to accomplish things. And so when you have these 10 Rephaim kings, just as Deuteronomy or Daniel 2:43 in the Metallic Empires talks about, the descendants of these metallic empires are going to mix their seed, commingle their seed with that of humans. You have a different race again being talked about here, that they had these things that were being passed on. But these 10 kings in Revelation 17 talks about, with one like mind will hand their power over to Antichrist. This is the hive mind that they talk about. And the hive mind is this whole sort of queen bee. They raise that up to that Sophia level or divine essence counterfeit of the Holy Spirit in their pantheon. That sort of starts to come together. But there's one other interesting thing that people don't really realize that sitting there in the Bible is how the Israelites were able to go up against the giants and the hybrid giants, right? And God said he would deliver them up for them. And we get a couple occasions on there where he might be sending hail at, in the battle of Gibeon and places like that. But typically it says 3 times, I am going to deliver them up to you with hornets. Very, very odd, isn't it? And that it would totally discombobulate them so that they would be attacking each other and you just walk up and just kill them because they're just going crazy. The natural enemy of the bee and of the hive is the hornet.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Wow, that's so poetic.
Panic because they couldn't talk to each other. They didn't know how to do battle and do things without having that hive mind.
So essentially, one's feeling panic, they're all now feeling panic.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Wow.
Oh, we're going deep tonight, folks. Real deep tonight. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch back through this here and take myself some notes. I was a good boy this time around and trying to keep my eyes off the paper.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I remember specifically, there's one instance where we have the angel of the Lord who's talking about having fought for Israel. I believe it's in the book of Judges when he's talking about this. And he specifically says, I essentially routed them before you with hornets.
Yeah. 3 times we're told.
Wow.
He will use hornets against the giants. And so one expects that was always.
Diane, I like the one where the religious leaders were still standing up to the vaccination shutdowns. I was very impressed with that.
They were always delivered up.
Wow. Man, we have really unpacked a lot here. We still got
So that's why you have this hive mind that's so much in science, and it's also part of their history. And you have, like with the Anjou, they have, these emblems that look like fleur-de-lis, but they're actually an allegory for bees.
Wow. You can even look into entertainment. You look into Star Trek with the Borgs.
Yeah.
This
exactly the same thing. And it has a queen.
Man, it is so poetic.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And their transhumanism, like it's just they just encode it on all sorts of level as to who they are, where they came from, and what they're planning. You just have to understand the language they're talking in.
well, and I wondered this too, with the trans agenda right now being what it is, and especially inside the United States, I have a very sneaky suspicion that the mark of the beast will allow you to change your sex at the drop of a hat, do the same sorts of manipulation to your body that the Watchers were able to do.
Yeah, so transhumanism, transgenderism has similarities and essentially different wings of the same tactic.
Yeah, great links, Di. Tricky's right. Very good links, Di. Thank you.
Of part of the overall game plan, overall strategy. And so the assumption is basically this, that your Oikotarian is just the body. And the soul and the mind, they classify the mind and the soul as being similar. It's not quite how we would understand it biblically, because the spirit merges with the soul, which is part of this world. And then the mind, it comes from the merging of the soul and the spirit. But they say the soul and the mind are the same thing, and that the body is like a sleeve. That you can replace a new body, transfer the consciousness, but you can only do that within the physical world. And if you notice, they never talk about the spirit. Everything in polytheism downplays the spirit because that comes from God. It's only about the soul that's part of this world. And
it's like,
again, if you understand their understanding and their language, you start to know what they're talking about.
I was just thinking about Vast Talia. He was here earlier, but he doesn't seem to stick around anymore. He just pops in for like 5 minutes.
So when they look at a spirit angel, it has no gender, but they can choose a gender. So if you're going to be a little god and raise yourself up to be that level, in this art analogy through the soul versus the spirit, which permits you to choose your gender, you can be gender fluid, which is the other doctrine that they're starting to enter, that you can change your understanding of your gender as you go through your life. So that's that whole sort of complete allegory of their doctrine.
It's going to make it look so sexy to those who are already deluded and are confused. It's going to make it look so sexy to them.
Yeah. They can't talk about the spirit because then it would make their belief system look inferior.
Yeah, it's very much like the same idea behind. There's actually a fantastic anime called Ghost in the Shell, where people they upgrade their bodies into like android type bodies or robots, and they're just depositing the soul from one into the other. Same with the show Altered Carbon, where they actually called their bodies sleeves. Yeah, we're on the same wavelength.
Yes.
Okay, so sort of with our last 15 minutes, I would love to address the presentation of this apocalypse taking place towards like the middle to the latter half of Enoch, where it's describing like I should preface by saying, for those who haven't read Enoch, there are some beautiful moments inside where it talks about rewards that will be lavished upon those who are following the elect one, Jesus Christ. But by and large, the book is really a it's sort of the death knell for those who are going to live a life of sin, never come on home to redemption, and it really explains in sort of graphic detail what's going to happen to the Watchers and those who are deceived.
Yeah.
I'd love to see what are your thoughts with when it describes when it's describing not just the Watchers that did sin with human females being cast into the pit. But then we have this talk inside Enoch about Christ riding in with his elect. We see the same scene played out inside Revelation, where he comes with a robe dipped in the blood of his enemies, and they essentially lay siege to the cities of men. That in conjunction with Revelation 9, where we have the king reigning over the locusts in the abyss. We have Apollyon or Abaddon. And they come out, and we have this humongous power encounter on the earth. Where does Enoch line up with the Bible in that event?
Well, Enoch lines up well with end time prophecy. So one of the issues, though, with the book of Enoch is it seems to have had additions to it, which seem to be almost sort of added in from sort of New Testament, from the age of things. So, but it does add, it does follow prophecy quite.
I thought you were doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger joke, Tricky.
Close.
Sorry.
So whether it's true ancient prophecy or more of the, let's say, 200 AD version of the addition into it, hard to know, but it does line up very, very well.
Oh, I should have left it up there then.
In the book of Jude about Enoch matches up almost word for word in the book of Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
So we know there was an original Hebrew manuscript. What we don't know is how much has been added to it. And there's theories of how many different writers there were for this. And so, but some of it is going to be for sure that comes out of what they think is part of the lost hagiography that we're talking about, like from the Toledoth of Adam and the Toledoth of Noah, and some of those versions would make up what we look at as the older part of Enoch. The prophetic side, it's really hard to know because Enoch lived before the flood. Mm-hmm. So, and it's talking about in some places in the book of Enoch about the tribe of Dan in Bashan. Well, that's like an after writing in terms of how that's put in. So there's some additions. So we have to be careful. And in the document I have on the book of Enoch, I actually have some of the corruptions that you want to be aware of, even though I like it a lot. It runs 99%. One of those obvious corruptions is it has the angels making the ark for Noah.
Huh.
Yeah, that's it's polytheist version, right? So there's corruption in there. But again, we don't have that complete Hebrew manuscript. It's got Enoch 500 years old, twice. Well, Enoch was taken to heaven at 365.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I noticed inside the book of Enoch too was
he knows. Tricky, he just won't admit it. Of course he knows.
You don't have talk inside there of like a being forgiven of sins, sort of a once and for all type of thing. There's a number of moments where it really seems like your entrance into eternity is really contingent on the works that you do. And we know according to the Bible, that's not the case.
Yeah. So, and so we just want to be careful. So even with the book of Enoch, where it doesn't line up perfectly with the Bible, can't use it. But there's a lot in there that I think is, because I do like it a lot. So we want to be a little bit careful with it. So one of the things that you don't really see in the book of Enoch is the lake of fire.
Yes, it talks about like a hot place, and it talks about like a furnace type place, but you don't see the lake of fire.
Yeah, in the book of Enoch, they're only talking about the pit prison. They're talking about a place of fire and ice where the watchers are going to.
Interesting.
And the pit is in Sheol, in Hades, but in a specific place and probably in another dimension. The lake of fire is somewhere else. And that's because I don't think that it was wanted to be made known to the angels at that point in time about the lake of fire. We really learn about the lake of fire, other than some references to maybe fire in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, the lake of fire. And in Matthew 25, we're told that the devil and his angels are going to go to that lake of fire, and that the people who take the mark of the beast are going to go to that lake of fire. One would presume many of the Rephaim and the Nephilim are going to go to the lake of fire, unless they chose God and followed Jesus at some point in time. So, and the lake of fire is also the place of the second death. So there's specific people that aren't going to die in that lake of fire, and there's people that will die in that fire. So the lake of fire, it's another thing that's poorly translated in the Old and the New Testament, is they conflate hell into one concept. That's actually three different places.
I noticed also that, and this is unfortunately this really became mainstream Christian belief in the wake and really heavily proliferated by the Catholic Church, that they believe Satan reigns in hell, as though hell and all its red delights are being carried out by him and his minions, which is not the case.
No, he reigns on earth.
Yeah, he is the prince of the power of this world.
Yeah.
And I like that Enoch
and that's why the Hollywood elite sign up and sell their soul to Satan. They think when they go down to hell that it's a party down there, and in heaven it's boring, but in hell it's party time. They really think that they're going down to share a kingdom with Satan, and they get a real rude shock when they find out they're wrong, as Anton LaVey did.
Also does not feed into that misunderstanding that, oh, Satan is somehow like king of this underground area. We have our 9 rings of power.
If you want to look at it prophetically, he will be the king of the lake of fire.
Oh,
he's there forever. Other people that he can reign over who are all being punished there as well, but that's not today.
Man,
and first he's got to go to the abyss for 1,000 years, and then to the lake of fire.
Boy, that's going to chafe. Spending eternity in a prison where you put 90% of the inmates there yourself.
Yeah.
Goodness. Wow. So, sort of, we'll start to wrap it up here. We got about 8 minutes left. But for those who are wondering, okay, we've talked about Enoch, we've talked about the Watchers, the angels, we've talked about these different classes of angels, these different classes of beasts. If you're wondering what does it matter to know this information, a big reason, at least from what I've been able to deduce in my own study, there's sort of a twofold reason in why it's helpful to know this information, know who the Nephilim were.
Oh, I thought you meant hell,
what they did and what their sin meant for mankind. Is number one, if you look at it from an apologetic standpoint, it gives you a reason for the wartime violence inside the Bible. Anytime you don't see Israel when they're having either a civil war amongst their own tribes or they're fighting with the progeny of Lot, they are fighting these Nephilim and Rephaim tribes. So it gives a reason, as Peter would say, for the hope that is in you, to be able to explain to somebody.
Sure, and understanding that the Nephilim and all of those tribes swore in an oath, as the book of Psalms talks about, to conspire to wipe Israel from the face of the earth to be remembered no more.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. Because even God says that he's going to blot out the name of the Amorites from completely off the earth. And now I'm picturing more hornet activity in my mind here. But the other part of why it's pertinent to understand this information is that knowing the basis of this, understanding what the Genesis 6 conspiracy was all about, what that event was, it gives you an understanding of just how important it is to recognize your pedigree within the kingdom. You're not born of angels. You're born of God, and he put his spirit inside of you. Recognizing that their entire aim from beginning to end was to corrupt the bloodline so dramatically that God couldn't even look at his people on earth that he created as human anymore.
Wow.
And would make us damned creations for all time. Like it's a very heavy thing to have to sit with. And then when you look at what will happen as Jesus describes the end times being as the days of Noah, this resurgence of these Nephilim and Rephaim genes through humanity again. It's all done in an effort to change you from being his elect.
Yep, and to not be raised into immortality, to be like angels. That's the whole plan. And the Amalekites is a perfect sort of post-Diluvian story. And so they were wanting to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, and they led other people into it. That's why you have the Psalms referencing the nations that were conspiring to do that.
You probably could die.
It's greater than that, because the Amalekites were doing it for a reason, just as the Midianites were. So, you know, the Midianites, for example, derived from Abraham and through a concubine of Abraham. So they have an inheritance right if Israel's not there. So they're going to be part of it. But the Amalekites even have a stronger inheritance claim if Israel is not there. So the Amalekites are born from Eliphaz and Timnah. Timnah is a Horim. Eliphaz is the son of Esau. Esau is the brother of Jacob. Jacob took the blessings of the Messianic blessing, the birthrights, and the three sets of major promises for Jacob, and that changed his name to Israel and begets the Israelites to bring about the Messiah. If the Amalekites with this Sion Rephaim bloodline, because Timnah is a Horim, as it's accounted for in Genesis 36, and a new dynasty with a purebred fairy queen, and the dukes were Alice, where you get the elven elf allegory that goes with that Genesis 36 side of the bloodline of the giants that are trying to get a hold of the birthrights through the Amalekites. That they're going to replace
she sounds charming,
Shawnee, and supersede and take the Messianic blessing to produce their dragon Messiah. There was so much at play there with the Amalekites, why they had a transgenerational blood oath to wipe them from the face of the earth. So you have
Diane, he was too busy getting a phone number to take a pic.
Egg, who is the patronymic king title of the Amalekites in the time of the Exodus. You have another Agag in the time of King Saul.
You do, the one that old Samuel hacks the faces.
Yeah, and Saul violates his claims to the monarchy because he doesn't carry it out, because these are the people that want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. It's a blood oath. That's transgenerational. Then you have Haman the Agagite. An Agagite is synonymous with Agag and an Amalekite who's sitting at the highest royal court of the Persian Empire, who wants to wipe Judah, the southern kingdom that's left, from the face of the earth in that time.
Man, these guys are really one note, aren't they? Goodness.
Yeah,
and I love that he gets skewered down on that pike. That is just fantastic.
So it starts to, when you start to connect the dots on some of the things, it starts to explain things, and it brings the Old Testament to life, and it starts to help you decode what's going to happen in the end time, because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. It happens over and over and over. So just as Satan originally stormed heaven to try and put his throne in heaven and to be like God, Antichrist and Satan will do that again in the end time.
Yeah, right.
Well said. That is a perfect note to end on there. Thank you so much, Gary, for taking the time to
Okay, that was a really good video. I really enjoyed that. You can't go wrong with Gary Wayne, can you? So hang on. I've got, where is it? UFOs, angels, and gods, alien abductions explained, prophecy. So I haven't done this guy yet. Let's see if it's any good.
If you were to look at the city at night 40 miles away, you don't see any lights. All you see is a glow, an orange, yellow glow. They were monsters and they were circular. Well, of course, we came from Naval Air Test Center outside of Washington, D.C. We were testing everything we think of. There's nothing on the boats that we do of any type of craft like that. So the speed of the craft is always in excess of 1,000, 1,500 miles an hour. We got within about, say, 15, 20 miles of this object. It was a large pattern on the water, a circular pattern. I mean, it was large. About maybe 30, 40 seconds.
That is true.
A yellow halo. Small, period. This is about 10, 15 miles away. And that halo came up toward us for 10,000 feet. 15 miles away, like this. People who were aware
Okay, Tricky, good night, mate.
was Harry Truman. Vice Admiral Helium-Cutter was the first director of the CIA. Admiral Bradford, who became the first Joint Chief of Staff.
Okay, is that bowling
Leo
going to
was the
improve?
Commander's time, General Eisenhower. I took it from there that it was better to keep it quiet about it.
I sent out 750. We have traffic for us at 2 o'clock.
7 Juliet, 1 o'clock and 10 miles eastbound the city at 29. That's about all it's out there.
Okay. Here's 770 Juliet.
7 Juliet, go.
I got traffic here about 1:30 or 2 o'clock. It's very bright, doesn't seem to be moving, just changing colors. All things are dark. It looks like it's about 8 or 10 miles away.
Actually, I'm showing fog at 12:30, 10 miles. Here's the southbound.
And we're up here at 38, so I got that thing looking straight off the news.
County 705, traffic 2 o'clock, 15 miles south, outside of altitude on the low base you see up there. Should be up around 39,000.
Yeah, I see someone on the finder. 61909, descending out 30, 69,000.
50 Juliet, you still see traffic out there?
Hell yeah.
You got a direction on?
Stationary. He's about 8 to 10 miles, and he looks like he's coming right at us. He gets real bright, like he's got landing lights on, then he turns away. Probably the comet. Yeah, we saw the comet about 2 weeks ago. We know what that looks like. It's in these clothes.
Okay, Cactus 700. Take a look at 2 o'clock, 25 miles, 2,000 feet above you. So we don't see any big traffic out there.
That's a twin planet. It's been there for about 3 or 4 weeks.
And 7 Juliet, your level at 39 now, second friend.
That's coming. 1147.
Roger 72 Juliet, you up your left wing now?
Going off our left wing now.
Roger. 7, contact you from approach 120.15.
Okay, I got 700 outside. 10 going to 9 o'clock traffic.
All civilizations attribute their genesis to contact with the gods.
Okay, Tally, good night.
In
God
their
bless.
historical and spiritual texts, our ancestors maintained that immortal beings from elsewhere were responsible for the development
I
of life
mean,
on
it's not
Earth.
what I wrote.
Despite common acceptance of these creation tales as mythology, sightings of supernatural beings and contact with them have persisted through to the 21st century. Could this be the worldwide UFO phenomenon? According to recorded history, laws, sciences, architecture, even writing itself, stem from knowledge received from the gods. The Bible has many accounts of flying objects and beings from elsewhere coming to the earth. Can these accounts shed light on the nature of the UFOs? Are they mere observers or participants on the world stage? Are they all benign, or do they have an agenda? And finally, do the UFOs fall in the scope of biblical prophecy?
When the Lord said that in the last days knowledge would be revealed, the Spirit is beginning to show us the truth of it. Right? And as the church is beginning to wake up to it, it's changing our perspective considerably. It's making it so much more real, I think, than it has been in the past. But this is definitely the work of the Holy Spirit. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
While I was in seminary, I became distressed over the fact that many of my professors in seminary did not seem to believe in what I would call some of the most basic things, such as the resurrection and ascension of Christ. The Christian faith does not work if there's no resurrection. And so I felt I needed to study the whole issue of eschatology, which is future things, more deeply before I entered ministry. And so I went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and spent 3 years doing my PhD there and studied the issues of eschatology, time and space, in the thought of Isaac Newton, because I was a 17th century figure who was pivotal in changing our understanding of the universe in which we live. By the time I was in my 3rd year of PhD studies, suddenly the whole issue of how the space age might relate to the Bible and the possibility that beings from other worlds might visit our planet, and if they did so during biblical times, what might the reaction be? These issues started coming to my consciousness. And then, of course, I made the connection with UFO reports. In Christian art, the question of how it was these human-like beings got to Earth from up in the sky was dealt with by putting wings on them. They felt that they couldn't just fly around without wings, so they turned the angels into bird-like creatures so that they'd be humans with wings on, and that's how they got up into the sky.
With the birth of the 20th century came advances in technology that allowed us to soar into the skies and even reach into the heavens.
Because of the day and age in which we live and the kind of things that we're seeing in the world today with the technology and our search for extraterrestrials and those kinds of things are top on people's minds as they look outward. With those ideas in mind, as I began to read scripture, suddenly the angels started to appear more and more like those that are coming out of these ships. Scripture refers to them often as fiery chariots and the like.
The chariots of God are myriads, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them as in Sinai, in holiness. Psalm 68:17.
One of the strange things to me is that there's been very little connection between our idea of angels and UFOs. And yet the idea is that both are some kind of reality that comes from a higher world above Earth. And wherever that other world is, we don't know. And the possibility is that both groups influence human development and are guiding human development, and perhaps are even acting in a godlike way in controlling human culture. But there's never, by and large, in modern thinking, there's been almost no attempt to connect the two. A well-known UFO sighting involves the prophet Elijah. He finishes his life on Earth, and he goes to the Jordan River with his associate prophet Elisha, and is taken up into the sky in a chariot of fire. In the New Testament, some magi, some wise men from the east, saw a sign in the sky, which they thought was a star, called a star, and they followed it to the place where Jesus was born. And one of the interesting things that it says is that when the star came to the place where Jesus was, that it stopped. And stars don't usually move through the sky like this, nor do they stop after they've been moving. So this sounds more like the type of thing that you would get from a UFO report. In UFO studies themselves, there are interesting reports of people out driving in a car. A UFO comes along, flies over their car, and then flies ahead of them and leads the way back to their home. So this idea of following the leader is something we see in some modern UFO stories. It's there in the story of the birth of Jesus. And basically the Exodus story is a follow the leader story. The pillar of cloud and fire is the leader, and it's God leading the way to the promised land.
As you start to look at this, it becomes clearer and clearer that the Lord and his angels exist in the physical universe. Maybe in other places too, but at least now we know that they're here.
The supposition of the church has always been that everything was done by the supernatural power of God, kind of an energy that can do anything it wants to. And I suppose if you want to go that route, it's okay. But as we move ahead in our own technology, and we don't know the world of the angels doesn't use technology.
When you're thinking, oh, God couldn't possibly use technology. And then I realized, well, we are his children. I mean, even the dark angels are his children. And so that ability and that desire to explore and to expand and learn is part of our godliness, is part of our divineness. So it's It's when we look at ourselves and say, yes, we are the children of God, and yes, we are going into space, and yes, we are using technology, because God's angels use technology, and God uses it as well.
The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that's reported in Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 and 22 in fullest detail. And it's said that the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night led the Exodus. It hovered above the ground. It was cloud-like during the day. It glowed in the dark. Some of the modern cloud cigars have been reported to be bigger than our battleships, maybe a quarter of a mile long, and that they would serve as the mothership for the smaller flying saucer type UFOs. The ascension of Jesus is spoken of in Acts chapter 1, and it basically says that Jesus had some parting words for the disciples, and then he was lifted up into the air in a cloud, and the two angels or men stood by and said, "This Jesus whom you see going into heaven will return." He returns in some similar way in Acts chapter 9, when the Apostle Paul, who is persecuting the Christian church and on his way to Damascus to put Christians in jail, when suddenly a bright light hovers over him and the company that was with him on the road to Damascus, and he hears a voice speaking to him, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he answers back with a question, "Who are you, Lord?" And the answer is, "I'm Jesus whom you are persecuting." So the means by which Jesus returns to earth on the Damascus road seems to be consistent with the way he went away at the time of the ascension. Perhaps the most detailed UFO report in the Bible is in the book of Ezekiel. And here the UFO itself is referred to as being like burnished bronze, so it has a metallic appearance. It probably has landing gear, it appears. And so the way in which it's described, it even has eyes around it, and being like a wheel within a wheel is a pretty good description of what some modern flying saucer type UFOs have been reported to appear, and so on.
What I did was, in the first chapter of Ezekiel, I just took pencil on a piece of paper and I sketched out the description. And when I drew those eyes, of course, around the outside of the rim, it was like looking at a 1950s version of a flying saucer.
Ezekiel, an Old Testament prophet of the 6th century BC, has left a record of his encounters with God and of the interaction that ensued. With many of his people, he was taken captive to Mesopotamia, where, according to scripture, the first encounter occurred. Artists throughout the ages have depicted this encounter as they saw it.
And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst of it, like the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. The appearance of the wheels of their work was like the color of a beryl, and they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rims, they were so high that they were dreadful, and their rims were full of eyes round about them four.
Coming to realize that God has come into the universe as a physical being was a great revelation to me.
Well, the biblical view of angels was they could be very human-like In fact, you might not be able to tell the difference between an ordinary human and an angel. And that, in fact, goes way back to Abraham in the book of Genesis, where 3 men came to meet with Abraham and eventually foretold the birth of his
Wow,
son
no
Isaac.
coincidence. I was
Abraham
never
come
here.
to
That was
understand that
interesting.
these were agents of God or angels of God.
Suddenly, the existence of the Lord's angels on our planet became very real. And the possibility of meeting them, because our scripture says, you may entertain an angel unawares. And so suddenly that becomes not some sort of ethereal event, but rather a real person actually coming and visiting in this case.
The angels in the Bible usually appeared in human form and appeared very briefly, as in the case of the angel that descended from heaven.
Diane, they're going very close to hard disclosure now, aren't they? They've done all the soft disclosure, now they're just hitting you in the eyes with it.
Back to the stone at the tomb of Jesus and then sat upon it. Obviously, you would understand that this being is very human-like. And there's no report there actually of the angel having any wings. And in fact, there's a passage in the book of Hebrews which says, "Be sure to entertain strangers, because thereby some have entertained angels unawares." It seems to me that the doctrine of the resurrection suggests that we humans will end up in a world, a heavenly world, which we have bodies. That's what the Apostle Paul seems to promise in 1 Corinthians 15 in his long statement on the resurrection of the body. And of course, the resurrection of the body of Jesus is meant to confirm that idea that we're not just going to be the spirits that have no dimension, but we're going to have bodies, a spiritual body, but nevertheless a body that can be touched the way Thomas and the others touched the body of Jesus.
See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Luke 24:39.
The Bible speaks of a spiritual, physical body. The idea that God and angels take this shape simply to interact with humans is beyond the scope of the biblical text. In our culture, some scientists speculate that the key to immortality may lie in DNA.
At first I was thinking, how is it possible for God to be a person, right? In a body? When we think of God as being omnipresent and omnipotent everywhere, inside and outside of all things, how is this possible? And so the mind tends to go to the extreme, the large, the imperceivable, right? when we think about God. And so what I found, began to realize what I was doing, was I was limiting God's power. I was saying to myself, God couldn't do this because he is so big and inconceivable. How could he be a person? Well, and then I realized what Christ said with God, all things are possible. And so when I thought that God had created this universe and then entered into it, right, to be part of it, and then have a son, right, for which we believe he created it, was a wonderful revelation.
The UFOs have already kept us from annihilating ourselves. I think that UFOs started doing things that led to the formation of the hotline in the United States and Russia back when we had the weapons to do bad stuff, and we were thinking, let's strike first. There are stories of UFOs flying in formation and triggering the NORAD sightings, okay? And they were all set to push the buttons, and then they realized UFOs are doing this. So then Moscow and Washington had to start talking to each other. They also had UFOs flying over nuclear sites a lot. UFOs flew over a nuclear hardened silo out in, I believe, South Dakota, and retargeted the warhead in there. Now, if you're the president of the United States and you're thinking of pushing the button, And the guys out there told me, well, you did have it targeted for Moscow, but guess what? A UFO came, retargeted for Washington. So if you push the first strike button, guess what? It's getting you. How did this happen? We don't know. A UFO flew over it. Apparently they can control our technology. The angels that came to meet with Abraham and tell him that Isaac would be born, or the angels liberating Jews from Egypt, or the angel coming down from the sky to roll back the tomb and raise Jesus, these are all good angels. What about bad angels?
This war that was happening between the fallen angels and our Lord's angels. And as we began to study it, you started to realize that the dark angels, Satan's angels, are here on planet Earth.
Our perception of reality has been skewed by the artistic depiction of angels. The angelic reality, or UFOs as we call them today, have been a constant in human history and have been an integral part of our story.
For many centuries now, Satan literally has been ruling the world.
And he led him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, I will give you all this domain and all its glory, for it has been handed to me, and I will give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you worship before me, it shall be yours. Matthew 4:8-9.
Satan has been ruling through his minions and through his officers and generals and so forth, and real beings, real people. And the Lord said that he would give him 4
Okay, Phil, I go look.
Before he would return.
The book of Daniel records that in the 6th century before Christ, during the Jewish exile to Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that disturbed him greatly. He tested the elders of his court by asking them to tell him the dream, followed by its interpretation. Nobody could accomplish this feat but a young Daniel, one of the Jewish exiles to whom this matter was revealed by God. Daniel tells the king he dreamed of a statue with a head of gold, breasts and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron mixed with clay. A stone appeared which struck the feet and crushed them. The statue crumbled and turned to dust and was carried away by wind. All that remained was the stone that became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel tells the king that God has revealed to him the sequence of world empires, from the time of Nebuchadnezzar to the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. The Fourth Empire, Rome, is separated into East and West. The eastern part of the empire is conquered by Islam.
That's interesting, East and West, the legs. Wow. And he's saying Islam's one of them. Let's take that back a bit.
The Fourth Empire, Rome, is separated into East and West. The eastern part of the empire is conquered by Islam. Constantinople is renamed Istanbul. The western part remains the dominant world power. According to the Bible, these 4 empires are ruled by the fallen angels, the gods.
When Christ said that Satan's throne was in Pergamum, that was I think the first real clue that something else was going on as well. And so when we looked at that, we found that, well, the throne of Zeus was in Pergamum, a huge temple right there.
Scripture records that after Jesus ascended to God, he sent an angel to earth with a message which was recorded by his disciple John. The content of this message is referred to as the Book of Revelation. It begins with 7 messages conveyed to 7 Christian congregations of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey.
And to the angel of the church in Pergamum write, the one who has the sharp two-edged sword says this, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast my name and do not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. Revelation 2:12-13.
Jesus makes an association between the city of Pergamum and the throne of Satan, suggesting that something visible is pointed out. Textual and archaeological evidence point to the same candidate, the Great Altar of Pergamum, one of the most significant and stunning monuments to survive from the Greco-Roman world. Today it is preserved in the Berlin State Museum. On it is depicted a cosmic battle between the gods and the Titans, their hybrid offspring, flesh and bone descendants of heaven and earth. A connection is made by Jesus between the leader of the gods, Zeus in the Greek pantheon, and Satan, the leader of the fallen angels.
We began to take a look at the Roman and Greek gods and began to realize that they were the one and the same fallen angels. These were real beings who were setting up real kings on the earth, ruling under their auspices, whatever they decided they wanted to do. And we see this pattern in mythologies all over the world. In the Greeks, certainly the Egyptians, there's no doubt about that. The Lord himself, when he killed the firstborn of Egypt at the Exodus.
Good point, Oz, never here. They'd have to be, wouldn't they? With all the revelations lately, they'd have to be worried, like, geez, what's really going on? How come the Bible knows it?
Also said that he was putting their gods under judgment. Now, one doesn't put a stone statue under judgment. I mean, this is, so obviously this was a war with these gods, these fallen angels.
For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Exodus 12:12.
In 303 AD, Diocletian
Good on him, Diane.
sent a messenger to the oracle of Apollo to ask about the Christians. The answer came from Apollo, enemy of the gods. As a result, Emperor Diocletian on February 23, 303, chose the festival of the god Terminus to commence the termination of Christianity. Edicts were published decreeing Christians holding public office are to be put out. All accusations against Christians are to be received. They are to be tortured, their scriptures confiscated and burned, the church buildings to be destroyed, the civil rights of Christians denied. Presidents, bishops, and leaders of churches are to be arrested and compelled to sacrifice to the gods. Wild beasts, burnings, stabbings, crucifixions, the rack, all the reliable methods of torture were mercilessly employed. In certain places it lasted 8 years, and it is known to historians as the Great Persecution.
Wow, I never knew about that. I knew Rome persecuted a lot of Christians, but I didn't know a specific campaign that heavy.
Another one of these so-called gods who has exercised a large influence over humanity is the one who presents herself as the Mother Goddess. She has various names in various civilizations, but one of her favorite epithets is the Queen of Heaven. She is referred to in the Bible by that name. In the post-Christian era, she presents herself as Mary to the church. In the modern world, we see reports of believers being told to gather, awaiting a sign from the Queen of Heaven, Mary. And when they gather, silver discs appear. The most famous of these incidents, according to ufologists, is Fatima. In October 1917, 60,000 people gathered to receive a sign, and 3 silver discs appeared. As a result of this, the people felt sudden intense heat, drying of clothing and of the soil, physiological effects, or miraculous cures. Could the same fallen angels who presented themselves as gods to our ancestors be reinventing themselves for the modern world as modern-day gods, or as aliens who have come to rescue us from ourselves? The Mayan calendar starts at 3114 BC and ends at 2012 AD. In 755 AD, Mayan priests prophesied that the total eclipse of the sun of July 11, 1991 would herald 2 events: cosmic awareness and earth changes. On that day, shortly after 1 p.m., a silver disk hung motionless below the total solar eclipse. By appearing during this eclipse, the UFOs have identified themselves to many as the Mayan gods.
Wow.
The solar eclipse, labeled the 6th sun by the Mayan priests, has been followed by a wave of UFO sightings in Mexico, which continue to this day. In March of 2004, the Mexican Air Force captured this footage on an infrared camera. The footage was released to the public.
Abajo o arriba o arriba. Ahí van. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Prueba de realidad. Ahí se van a ver bien. Y van a una velocidad, pero 8, 10, 11. Ok, no sabemos qué estamos viendo, son unos objetos nada más luminosos que vienen a la misma altura que nosotros. Con eso no podemos saber qué distancia.
This video, captured by NASA, shows 2 UFOs. It appears one of the UFOs is fired upon as it zooms away.
Okay, you're not seeing them very well.
This war is a real thing to me now, and that the enemy are real beings, real people, and that real angels, God's angels, are also here with us.
One of the strangest aspects of the current UFO research is the widespread emergence of abduction reports. Now, these stories are too bizarre to be accepted, and yet they're too consistent to ignore. There are actually conferences at MIT and elsewhere on the subject of what to do about these things. People are not only citing UFOs, they are apparently being abducted by them. And what's strange about these reports is they virtually always involve some kind of intrusive medical examination that always seems to have something to do with the reproductive system. And there are experts, such as Dr. John Mack at Harvard, who's head of psychiatry there. He's come out publicly and indicated that he personally is convinced that these things are alien beings have an agenda to reproduce hybrids. And this has, of course, shocked the psychiatric world because he's quite a prominent, well-credentialed expert. So something's going on, and of course, it's not free of controversy. Many people have different views, but what we put forth is the possibility that this may very well be a fulfillment of prophecy that Jesus hinted at when he warned us about these things.
People all over the world have the same experiences in precisely the same details. And so it's anybody and everybody. There isn't anybody who is predisposed to being abducted. The only thing is that their mother or their father must have been an abductee. We conducted a poll in 1991 of 6,000 randomly selected adults in the United States from all sections of the country, from all walks of life, done through the Roper organization. Not asking people necessarily whether they've been abducted or not, because people don't remember what's happened to them. We'll ask them questions that abductees answer affirmatively in very high percentages. The numbers were so high that we knew that politically we could not come forward with them. They were just insane. So we became extremely conservative with this poll. And we decided that we would only accept people who answered affirmatively to the 5 highest indicator questions of whether they've had abduction experiences. Although any question answering affirmatively to it could have meant that they were an abductee. Then we decided we would only count those people who answered yes to the 5 higher indicated questions if they answered yes to 4 or all 5 of them. It was possible, in other words, to answer
That first one hit me on the head, waking up paralyzed with the sense of a strange figure. I didn't sense it. I saw a silhouette from the light, a shadow against my wall. I literally saw a silhouette.
Affirmatively to 7 questions out of the 10 and be dropped from the poll. Maybe even 8 questions and be dropped from the poll. When we did that, we got it down to 2% of the American people. The numbers are probably going to hold constant when everything is leveled out around the world. It's somewhere between 2 and 5%, and probably closer to 5 or 6% actually.
Wow.
I've done about 900 hypnotic regressions. I've cataloged 650 of them or so. they will tell me something like, in 1996, I was with my friend, we looked up, and we saw this UFO coming down toward us. And, you know, the next thing you know, we were both running, and it was 2 hours later. We then begin to look into these events through hypnosis. We're looking at this primarily.
Good night, Diane. God bless. I'm out soon too.
And from an experiential point of view, in terms of remembering what happened.
I woke up from my sleep to a sound, and I looked towards my sliding door. I saw this object hovering above the tree line, taking up a great part of my view. It had a round part that was twirling constantly and flashing different lights. The white light on the top, the colored lights around, and a dark metallic material. I said, Hetty, this is something like the lifesaver colors. I fixed it in my mind. I ran, got my binocular, and was watching through that. I don't know how long I was looking at it before eventually it started drifting above the treetops to the left of my view. I wasn't dressed, so I just watched until it disappeared from my view. I don't know how long, how many days, maybe even a week or so went by. I heard something fall on the floor, and I went over and picked it up, and I'm looking my binocular. What's my binocular doing here? This is not where I keep it. And then click. That was the second when everything came back.
They know odd things have been happening. They don't remember what's happened to them, but they know odd things have been happening to them, let's just say. And they have a route that they go to. The first route would be to go to a therapist. Say, Doc, what's wrong with me? I wake up in the middle of the night, and there's beings standing on my bed, let's just say, and my first impulse is to go right to sleep. Which they know is unusual, because you'd think if somebody was standing on your bed, there'd be an adrenaline rush, the likes of which you've never had before in your life, and you would not go to sleep. And of course, they don't go to sleep. They think they did, but they don't. People say, I'm taken out of my room and I'm going and I'm going to the window, and they're taking me right to the window into the UFO. They're floating up. And the first time I heard this, I'd say, wait a minute now. You're walking towards the window. There are these beings with you. You can't run. You can't scream. You're rendered passive. You get to the window. Do you open the window? And I say, no. They say, I think I'm floating right through the closed window. And they'll say to me, does anybody else ever report that? Not knowing that everybody reports that. Everybody. Now, if this were psychological, I say, yeah, I opened the window. Because it makes their story sound natural, normal, logical. Why wouldn't they open the window? There's no big deal in opening the window. Of course they open the window. We just don't get that. And they know that it sounds crazy to say that they're floating through the window. They say, I can see people standing there, even sort of looking in my direction. But it's obvious that they're not shrieking in horror and running. They're just idly walking the dog or whatever it is. For that part of the abduction sequence, they are rendered unseeable to maintain the secrecy of this phenomenon. And it's something we can't get away from. It's embarrassing. Well, they're invisible, let's just say. Of course, they're going to a solid object, glass, or the wall sometimes, or to the ceiling sometimes. So you're looking, I think, at advanced technology. When people are abducted, they're taken on board a UFO. Their clothes are removed, they're placed on a table, and they have 3 events that happen to them, broadly conceived. There are physical procedures, mental procedures, and reproductive procedures.
This has been pretty interesting so far.
When men began to multiply on the face of the land, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Genesis 6:1-2.
There certainly have been sightings of ancient that may be embraced by ancient mythology. The idea that the modern sightings might have a relationship with the ancient Nephilim events of the Old Testament is conjecture on the part of some of us as scholars. But I think it would seem to be consistent with the remarks of Jesus himself. As Jesus himself said that as we get to the end time, he says, as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the Son of Man be. Now that, what he might mean by that is simply that it was business as usual until the judgment came. That's what many scholars would infer. But there are many scholars that believe the text implies even more than that. In order to understand what Jesus meant, we need to understand what the days of Noah were like. And clearly, the 6th chapter of Genesis demonstrates that the purpose of the flood of Noah was to deal with what was in effect the gene pool problem.
There isn't anybody who is predisposed to being abducted. The only thing is that their mother or their father must have been an abductee. And what that means is that they're abducted from the time they're infants all the way through until the time they're adults. And they're abducted in great frequency over and over and over again. They usually talk about having sperm taken, having eggs taken, harvested essentially. When women become older, they discuss fetal implantations where they suddenly realize they're pregnant. They'll take an early pregnancy test and it shows positive, which of course can't be possible. And they'll go to their gynecologist who'll do a blood test, which is absolute, which is 100% reliable. And the doctor will say, congratulations, you're pregnant. And they think to themselves, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Doctors invariably think pseudocyesis, which would be hysterical pregnancy, when a person or a woman really, really, really wants a child and begins to fantasize it, and even causes some sort of physiological reaction. However, most people are not like that. Some people have already had kids, they don't want any more. Some are too young for it. You have to have a certain sort of mental set to have pseudocyesis. Or they think miscarriage. And for women, they would say, well, if I had a miscarriage, I think I would have noticed that. With fetal implantation, we get, of course, fetal extraction. When they are not pregnant, they will remember events that happened where a fetus is extracted from them. It's very, very small, but they'll know during the event that the fetus is being taken. But it happens to them so often, it's familiar. So we've seen these reproductive procedures quite a bit. In fact, it's critical to the abduction phenomenon. Without the reproductive aspects of it, there wouldn't be an abduction phenomenon. This is the point of it.
The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:3-4.
The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew verb nephal, the fallen ones. They are the hybrid offspring of the Benai Elohim, the sons of God. It's a technical term, Hebrew term, used of angels. And these fallen angels cohabit with human women and produce a hybrid offspring. It was part of Satan's strategy. This view of Genesis chapter 6 and all of that is not free of controversy today. However, that is the view that was embraced by the ancient Hebrew sages. That is the view that is substantiated by the ancient rabbinical writings. That is the view that was accepted by the early church. When the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, the language is even more specific. And so this idea that they were somehow just leadership or sons of Adam or something were contrived arguments that emerged in the 5th century, the so-called lines of Seth idea. And that's still taught in many seminaries. The problem with it, it's not biblical. Because in the New Testament, it even confirms this. Both Peter and Jude make reference to this, clearly talking about these angels that went after strange flesh, that abandoned their previous clothing, they disrobed from their previous existence to indulge in this, what should I call it, chicanery.
This event was echoed in mythologies everywhere as the age of the Titans and demigods, the same way that the UFO phenomenon is echoed in our fiction.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, Christ was the first son of man. Sons of God are the angels. You're right, Barry.
Study the
I
passage
agree.
in Genesis 6, we'll notice that one of the distinctives of Noah was that his genealogy was unblemished. And the Hebrew word there is to mean, which is used of physical defects. In other words, one of the reasons that Noah was picked, probably many, but one was that one of his distinctives was that his genealogy wasn't contaminated by these goings on. It would appear that the strategy of Satan was to introduce this as a means of corrupting the human line to preclude God's plan of redemption through the Messiah, which had to be a kinsman of Adam.
The parable of Jesus that I count as foundational for Satan and evil is the one where Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a man who owned a field and sowed good seed in it, had his servants go good seed in it, and then by night an enemy came and sowed weeds in the field and then went away.
Well, the Nephilim in the book of Genesis, of course, are the hybrid offspring of these strange interludes between the fallen angels and the daughters of Adam. And so they're hybrids. And they are very prominent in the early chapters of Genesis, but they're also, the scripture says, occurred after that to some extent. Right. But they're hybrids. As we study the passages in the Bible that describe what we call the end times, it's interesting that one of the characteristics that shows up in Daniel 2 is that it says they will mingle themselves with the seed of men.
The prophetic dream of Nebuchadnezzar gives us an astonishing detail concerning end times. Scripture indicates that the last government of earth will be a hybrid government, iron mixed with clay.
And where you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not adhere to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Daniel 2:43.
Now, in order for them to mingle,
Okay, Phil, good night, mate.
men,
God bless.
they
I'm out after this as well anyway, guys.
the seed of men. So it's just a hint, but it's a
Who's got 15 minutes to go, then I'm out as well, guys.
profound hint that somehow in the end times there's going to be again some kind of commingling, some kind of intrusion into the genetic DNA makeup of people. And that's going to be a contaminant that would be part of the end times. And that's why there's so much scholastic interest in this UFO business, in the abduction narratives and reports. And we may very well be being plunged into a period of time about which the Bible says more than it does about any other period of time in history, including the time of the Gospels when Jesus walked the shores of Galilee.
When people are abducted, as part of the procedures, they will sometimes be taken into a room and they will see containers. And in each container, there's liquid, and in the middle of the liquid, there's a tiny fetus floating. Later, they'll be shown babies, small, odd-looking babies, as they will report. Their babies don't look right. Physically, they're phlegmatic. They look like they're sick. They're not bouncing babies that are gasping and gurgling. They're silent. They almost look like they're half dead. They also have unusual features. People say they look like they're sort of half human, half alien. They're odd looking, yet they look sort of human. My colleague Bud Hopkins says that they called them hybrids originally, and that's a name that's stuck. They then will have to hold the baby, have some sort of physical contact with the baby, put their hand on the baby's stomach, hold the baby close to their skin. There must be skin-on-skin contact. Oftentimes, when the baby's a little bit older, they're required to feed the baby. Sometimes they'll be brought into a room, this is now men and women, where there will be what looks like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 1.5-year-olds walking around, and they're required to play with them, have contact with them, and we see these toddlers when they're 4 years old, 5, 7 years old, 9 years old, they're already young children at that point. People describe them as adolescents. They describe them as young adults.
Yeah, Chris, nearly up now, though, mate.
Them as older adults so much. By the time we see them as adolescents, we see them involved with the abduction phenomenon, performing tasks. They have jobs to do. They're part of the world of abductions, going about their business, doing what's required of them.
Let's remember that when Jesus briefed 4 disciples in his confidential briefing on his second coming, he opened his discussion and he closed his discussion with the urgent admonition, let no man deceive you. We need to understand that the characteristic of the period that we're being plunged into is one of deceit, one of very clever misguidance by the enemy. We do have an enemy. He's very knowledgeable, very resourceful. And we are moving into open spiritual warfare. We're used to conflicts in countries about politics, different views. Today, there's a fundamental war going on in worldviews.
Sometimes abductees will be brought into a room and their attention will be directed at a screen-like device. And the person will hear a voice in their mind saying, can you tell the difference between us and you? Now, depending on who the person is, they will say, what do you mean the difference between us and you? Everybody is the same. And they'll hear in their head, see, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that beautiful? Pretty soon in the future, we will all be together. You won't be able to tell the difference, and it will be wonderful. Some will be able to tell the difference. Some would say, well, yes, this one here looks like you, and this one here looks like us. And at that point, they will say, well, you know, there will be a difference, but we will all be together, and you're one of the lucky ones. You can tell the difference. Most people won't be able to. The key fact here is that they are saying, in the future, we'll all be together.
As you follow the progress through the centuries and you see how the power structures have changed, it has been going more and more towards an economical power structure to control the world with money. And that seems to be where it's going. More and more, we're looking towards a world bank, one world system, one world currency. I mean, already Europe has joined its currency together. North Americans are thinking the same way. So this is really the work of Satan. This is his way of getting command and control over the entire world.
As we deal with the end time scenario in the Bible,
amen, Shawnee.
One of the dominant players is a world leader. In fact, it's 2 guys working together, but it's a world leader that is going to successfully unite the world into a one world religion. He's going to exalt himself above all that is called God. That includes Allah as well as the Jews and the Christians. He somehow is going to deceive the whole world. He's the most popular guy that's ever come along. There are experts that have studied the scripture that believe that he could very well have an alien connection or even be one himself. Involvement of these alien entities may be a far bigger factor in the climax that the Bible portrays than most classical scholars have really been sensitive to.
Sister 127. Sister 127, go ahead. Yes, sir. I don't know what it was, but it jumped over to like a couple of hundred feet above us, and it makes like cruising fast, also to the right shoulder. In the opposite direction? Yes, sir. And the time was, 2107. It was too fast to get airplane. Okay, thank you. Houston 96 Boston Center. Center maintain flight level 180. Down 180, yes, sir. Houston 96. You see anything like a missile in your area, perhaps off to your right? Take a good look, sir. I don't think if it's going that fast, I probably won't get a chance. We just saw split there, go by a little bit ago.
We found the phenomenon that is global, that is random, that is intergenerational, that happens in great frequency, something we never expected to see, that is goal-directed, that is done clandestinely, secretly, and that has as its goal ultimately an integration into the society on their terms, not on our terms. And I think that there's not a lot we can do about it, unfortunately.
You know, it's interesting that in the book of Genesis, the very first prediction of Jesus Christ is when God declares war on Satan, Genesis chapter 3, and he speaks that the ultimate redemption of man will come from the seed of a woman. And there is even a hint of the virgin birth. But that phrase is actually a contradiction in biology as well as grammar, but that's the term used. But most people overlook in that very verse, he also speaks of the seed of the serpent. And so it's clear that Satan has a role in this final climax that we're all heading to.
What we think is going on here, because eggs are taken,
No,
and sperm
Johnny.
is taken, that they are joined together in vitro. They are joined together outside, and at that point, either DNA is added or the fertilized egg is altered in some way. And when that happens, we posited that you're going to get a bell-shaped curve, that some are going to look really alien, some are going to look really human, and most are going to be in the middle. What we've also learned is that what they then do is take the...
Okay, guys, I'm out. Had a good show today. Thanks for joining, guys. See you tomorrow. God bless.